Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Bluml family. Roger Bluml was born on January 17, 1965, into a lively family with his parents and 7 siblings, 6 brothers and 1 sister. The family was not only large but also close-knit, instilling strong values and a sense of community. Even in high school, Roger was a diligent young man with future ambitions. He started driving his father's truck and, after finishing high school, worked in concrete transportation. Eventually, he realized his true passion was in sales, where he achieved success. His friends often said that he could sell ice to an Eskimo, which showed his amazing sales skills. This talent came with a generous, cheerful, and outgoing personality. He always seemed happy, and nothing pleased him more than making everyone around him smile. Roger had a good life and an excellent relationship with his family. The only thing missing was a partner, and one day he found that too. Although he did not elaborate, a close friend recounted that one evening, when he met a young woman who captivated him, Roger declared with complete determination that she was the woman he was going to marry. Melissa was born in Wichita on January 1, 1960. She grew up in a loving family with 3 girls and 3 boys, though sadly, a younger sister passed away before her first birthday. Melissa was a kind and diligent person, always willing to assist her family and others. She started her career as an accountant at a bank and built a successful path over the years. Her dedication, commitment, and teamwork earned her numerous promotions, eventually becoming vice president of the bank. In 1991, she met her soulmate, and they got married. Life appeared perfect for the Bluml family. Melissa advances in her banking career, while Roger uses his confidence to start his own business. Roger enjoyed spending time with friends and spreading happiness. He found an ideal partner in Melissa. Both shared a strong sense of social responsibility, actively participating in charity, sports, and community events. Although, as we've seen in almost every story, a perfect life doesn't exist, for the Bluml family, the only thing missing was a child to fill their loving home with laughter and joy. Unfortunately, this wish remained out of reach for the couple, and after years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive, Roger and Melissa began considering the idea of adopting a child. To fulfill their goal, they reached out to a local social worker and found out that a woman named Kisha Shaberg had put her 2 sons up for adoption. Her sons are Anthony, a 7-year-old whom everyone calls Tony, and Christopher, a 4-year-old known as Chris. Kisha wanted an open adoption, allowing her to keep in touch with her sons and the adoptive family. However, the Bluml family preferred to adopt the children without maintaining those connections, aiming to provide a fresh start for them away from their difficult past. Roger and Melissa's plan finally worked, and from that moment on, Anthony and Christopher officially became part of the Bluml family, starting to enjoy a life they never imagined. Emotional, Anthony was surprised to be able to have dinner every day. The kids adapted quickly and began to enjoy their new life. They attended elementary school and successfully completed that stage as good students. In high school, they also did well, had no issues with their peers, integrated completely, and formed a large group of friends. Plus, they excelled in sports, especially wrestling and football. Anthony quickly advanced in wrestling, earning 2nd place in a competition in his division. At that time, everything seemed to promise a bright future for the boys and a happy life for the whole family. However, the Bluml family began to fall apart when Anthony was in his senior year of high school. The young man, who had previously behaved admirably, started to change. He became someone who frequently argued with his parents, claiming they always favored his younger brother, Christopher. He began drinking alcohol, ignored curfews, and even smoked marijuana. Life in the Bluml household descended into chaos, and it soon appeared that any hope of the young man getting back on track was lost. For a long time, Anthony dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after high school, but his own actions ended that possibility. In 2013, he was arrested for an unspecified violent act and later, after graduation, for driving under the influence of alcohol. With these incidents on his record, a future in military aviation was no longer possible. Rather than reflecting on his situation, Anthony spiraled further downward. After graduating, his life lacked direction. He didn't want to study or work, all he wanted was to sleep late and spend his days in a haze of cannabis smoke. Melissa was terrified of the boy's angry outbursts, causing her to endure extremely difficult pressure. Adding to the complexity, there was something the Bluml family was unaware of. Since the spring of 2013, Kisha has been in contact with her biological sons through social media. It appeared that Christopher either ignored Kisha's friend request or showed little interest in communicating with his biological mother. In contrast, Anthony promptly accepted the connection and was thrilled to reunite with his real mother. Kisha was heartbroken after giving her sons to the Bluml family, but she found comfort in knowing they were both welcomed into a good home and would stay together. Despite this, she struggled with the lack of contact. Reconnecting with her eldest son filled her with joy, though she also felt deep resentment towards the Bluml family, believing they had turned Christopher against her. However, this resentment was overshadowed by the happiness of reuniting with her firstborn. Moreover, when she heard about Anthony's issues with his adoptive parents, Kisha became hopeful about reuniting with him and quickly invited him to visit her. Meanwhile, at the adoptive family's house, instead of getting better, things were getting worse. The conflict reached a boiling point when one day, during one of his tantrums, Anthony punched a hole in the wall. This was a turning point for the Bluml family. They could no longer risk their own safety or Christopher. After several unsuccessful attempts to stop the eldest son's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to tell Anthony he had to leave the house. The young man initially wandered without purpose but soon realized he needed to support himself. He found some jobs at fast food restaurants and supplemented his small income by selling cannabis. Although he slept like a nomad, staying at various friends' houses, he fell in with a group of youths heavily involved in drug abuse. In the midst of these challenging circumstances, a glimmer of hope appeared when Kisha invited him to come live with her in California. Anthony eagerly accepted, and they reunited at Kisha's home in September 2013. He was accompanied by his best friend from high school, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to dedicate himself to drug dealing. The two young men were excited because they hoped to get Kisha's support to start a large marijuana business in the area, as she was experienced in the drug trade. They even considered entering the medical cannabis market. In reality, the two young men ended up living in a small one-room apartment. It's easy to see how tensions arose, especially since Sean, Kisha's partner, worked 2 jobs and was the only one providing for 5 people. Kisha contributed only a portion of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Meanwhile, Kisha, Anthony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and Kisha's younger daughter was constantly exposed to this negative environment. At one point, things became unacceptable when Sean discovered that Anthony and Braden were selling marijuana near their house. He informed them that their actions were unacceptable and dangerous for his as the property owner, and insisted they take their drugs elsewhere. Following this incident, Sean issued an ultimatum to all the house occupants: everyone must find a job or leave the apartment. Instead of urging people to change as he intended, his actions led them to form an alliance and express their indignation towards his. They decided to leave the apartment and stay at a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, this was not a viable solution because after those weeks, they lacked the income to continue paying for the hotel. Their need for money didn't lead them to consider honest work. Their first thought was to return to Kansas, likely because Anthony knew the drug trade there well. After nearly a day of traveling, the group chose to stop in Arizona and rest overnight at a hotel. During their stay, Anthony shared a disturbing idea with his companions. He planned to kill his adoptive parents to claim their inheritance. When they arrived in Wichita, they booked a hotel room for a month and focused on planning the details of the affair. The plan was straightforward. They needed to eliminate Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance money, sell their assets, and use the proceeds to start a larger-scale drug operation. Anthony believed that the family he had returned to could become wealthy by growing and selling marijuana. He even suggested the ideal day for the crime, Friday, November 15, 2013, when his brother Christopher would be away at a wrestling event. Anthony, a former star wrestler, had stayed connected with some team members and found out about Christopher's commitment that night. Anthony gradually developed a plan to invite Roger and Melissa out under the pretense of discussing and resolving previous issues. Meanwhile, Braden would take Kisha to their home while it was empty so she could steal valuables. Anthony knows where his foster parents keep money for emergencies. The plan was to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, but from the start, the true intention was for Kisha to end Roger and Melissa's lives when they returned. Everyone initially supported the plan, but later, Braden decided to withdraw. Although he didn't want to be directly involved, he agreed to help by obtaining the necessary guns. Instead, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school classmate, to serve as the driver for Kisha to reach the Blommo residence. Braden fulfilled his promise by acquiring 2 pistols from other criminals. It's important to note that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew. He was promised $11,000 to act mainly as a driver and assist Kisha in the robbery. Ultimately, Kisha was to be in charge. In early November, Kisha shared a photo of herself with Anthony on social media, captioned, "A bond that cannot be broken." Finally, the anticipated day came, Friday, November 15, 2013. As Anthony had expected, his wonderful adoptive parents agreed to meet him without hesitation. The meeting went smoothly. Meanwhile, at the Bluml residence, a different scene unfolded. As soon as Roger and Melissa left for the meeting, Kisha and Andrew broke into the house by forcing open the garage door. They began searching through the house, seizing small valuable items and cash that the couple had kept for emergencies. After completing the first phase of their plan, Kisha and Andrew hid near the secluded house, waiting for Roger and Melissa to return. Shortly after, they received a call from Anthony. Anthony told them that the meeting was over and that his foster parents had left him at a hotel before going home. They didn't have to wait long. When the Bluml vehicle halted in front of the parking gate, 2 attackers emerged from hiding. Kisha quickly positioned herself next to Melissa, while Andrew targeted Roger to keep him still. Melissa, shocked, recognized Kisha as the mother of the children they had adopted over a decade ago to give them love, stability, and a better future. She could only exclaim, "Oh my God, Kisha," before a precise shot to her head caused her to collapse in her seat. Roger, utterly shocked, attempted to help his wife. At that moment, Kisha approached the window and aimed at Roger's head. She pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. She tried repeatedly to fire while Roger stood frozen beside his wife's lifeless body. Eventually, the gun went off, and Roger fell beside the woman who had been his life's greatest partner. After completing their deadly plan, Kisha and Andrew got into their vehicle and swiftly drove away. The Bluml couple remained there until about 9:15 p.m. when Christopher returned from a meeting and discovered the horrific scene. He quickly called 911, saying he had just come home and found his parents nearly unconscious in their van. He explained that Roger was coughing and Melissa was nodding her head. Both had gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher told him to perform resuscitation attempts while emergency services arrived a few minutes later to take over. Remarkably, the Blumls were still alive, but in critical condition, so they were rushed to a hospital. When they got back to the hotel where they were staying, Kisha seemed to have a panic attack and said she just needed to use an illegal substance, which she did with the other guys. Additionally, around that time, Kisha disposed of the used weapon and a purse containing items she had stolen from the house, so they could be dumped in a nearby stream. Andrew threw the items into a pond in a nearby park. The next day, Anthony used the money he stole from his adoptive parents to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100. Sadly, that same day, Melissa passed away at the age of 53 after a long battle. Anthony also visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been removed from both the Bluml family will and their insurance policies some time earlier. As a result, the two terrible crimes were committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it was discovered that Andrew had not been paid and was unaware that Kisha had taken money from the Bluml family's home. Eventually, they were caught. During the first inspections of the Bluml residence, police noticed the garage door had been forced open and the home was in complete disarray with items scattered everywhere. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other items were stolen. Authorities initially thought the attack on the couple happened because they arrived while the thieves were still there. However, it was later determined that the fatal assault occurred before the couple entered the home, so this theory was dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, investigators found no significant fingerprints, but they did discover a casing. The authorities then focused on the victims' workplaces, suspecting a disgruntled client might have sought revenge, but this theory was dismissed. Next, they decided to speak with people close to the couple. Anthony was first on the detectives' list because he was the last person seen with the victims. However, he insisted he knew nothing about the incident and had not been involved. He claimed that after dinner, he returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. This was confirmed by the hotel staff. Christopher was second on the list of suspects because he had discovered the bodies. However, he was quickly cleared after confirming that he was at a dinner with the wrestling team during the incident. Despite this, investigators noticed something unusual about his behavior. He didn't seem very upset and appeared deep in thought. When the police asked him who he thought might be responsible for what happened to his parents, Christopher promptly mentioned one person. He said the only person who might have a grudge against his parents and possibly commit such an act was his older brother, Anthony. Thanks to this crucial tip, the authorities caught a lucky break in their search for the culprits. A man reached out to the police to say that a young guy, a friend of Anthony, had approached him wanting to buy a gun. The detectives focused their attention on this person, and upon checking his background, they found he had a long history connected to drugs. They also found out that he had traveled to California with Anthony. The guy in question was Braden. Braden soon received a message from his family letting him know that investigators from the sheriff's office wanted to question him about the incident involving the Blumls. The next morning, Braden went to the police station. A press report revealed that on his way there, he stopped by a pond to discard something, reportedly the guns used in the crime that hadn't been disposed of as intended. According to this report, he was already under surveillance, and when the police searched the water, they found a bag he had thrown in, containing a pistol that hadn't been fired during the attack. Braden's interrogation lasted 3 days. Initially, he insisted he was not involved in the incident. However, under pressure from authorities, he eventually confessed everything he knew, explaining that the plan for the attack was Anthony's idea. Anthony Bluml, 18, and his biological mother Kisha, 35, were arrested on November 19 at the hotel where they were staying. In addition, Andrew, who was also 18, was arrested, followed by Braden's arrest on November 20, 2013. At that time, Kisha did not admit to being involved in the robbery and other crimes, even though the 3 young men confessed to what had happened. On November 25, 2013, the accused first appeared in court via video conference. During this appearance, They were all charged with the same offenses: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. The 3 young men were set a bail of $500,000, and for Kisha, the bail was set at $1 million. On December 21st, Rogers passed away at the age of 48, joining his beloved Melissa. After his death, the situation worsened for the woman and the 3 young men, as they faced the risk of being charged with capital murder, which could lead to a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were officially charged with capital murder, accused of being responsible for the deaths of multiple people in the same incident. Additionally, Kisha was charged with 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing was held on July 17 of that year. By that time, Braden had negotiated with the authorities and became the prosecution's star witness in exchange for a reduced sentence. After a year of negotiations, not only did Braden reach an agreement, but 2 other individuals involved in the crime also negotiated with the prosecution. According to the agreements, the accused would not contest the charges against them and would waive their right to appeal their sentences. In return, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty and to drop some charges. Starting in mid-2015, each of them confirmed their decision to plead guilty in separate hearings. The judge sentenced Kisha to life in prison without parole for the capital murder charge and an additional 122 months for 2 counts of aggravated robbery. These sentences will be served consecutively. When given the chance to speak, she expressed deep regret for what happened and sympathized with the Bluml family. However, the rest of her statement was controversial, as she claimed she was not involved in the incident and harbored no ill will towards the Blumls. Instead, she expressed great respect for them, acknowledging that they had provided Anthony and Christopher with a wonderful life, for which she remained grateful. Official records indicate that Kisha is still held in a high-security correctional facility. The next to face his fate was his son, Anthony Bluml, known to everyone as Tony, who received the same sentence as his mother. During the sentencing hearing, Anthony, who chose not to speak when given a chance, listened to the victim impact statement made by his aunt, Christina Bluml. She thanked the authorities for delivering justice and spoke about all the love that Roger and Melissa had shown the boy. In complete silence, Anthony listened to Christina's heartfelt words, and at one point, tears almost welled up in the young accused's eyes. Ultimately, the woman informed Anthony that he had made his decisions voluntarily. She suggested that he might eventually understand his choices, or perhaps he never will. Since then, Anthony has been in a correctional facility. Up to now, his record includes numerous infractions, such as smuggling, fighting, unauthorized phone use, explicit sexual activity, theft, and disobedience, among others. A week after those trials, it was Andrew's turn, the only one who refused to admit his responsibility. He was found guilty of first- and second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 155 months. Finally, Braden, the last person involved in the incident, who had made a plea deal with the prosecution from the start, was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 242 years in prison. According to his official record, Braden will have his first chance to be released on May 28, 2035. However, his prison record shows he hasn't reformed, as he has received 71 disciplinary reports for disobedience, threatening others, using stimulants, drunkenness, possession of contraband tobacco, theft, and dangerous smuggling, among other reasons. Ultimately, the district attorney was satisfied with the case's outcome. Although Kisha had given up that option, she unsuccessfully tried to appeal her sentences. The undeniable fact at the conclusion of this story is that the lives of 2 wonderful people, Roger and Melissa Bluml, ended in a tragic and needless way. The tragedy began with the bitterness or guilt of a woman who lived a life of excess and gave her children up for adoption. She couldn't handle the fact that one of her descendants no longer wanted contact with her. This seemingly caused her to misdirect her anger towards the people who had lovingly cared for her children. Anthony reacted to the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence. He turned to substance abuse and eventually committed 2 crimes. Kisha's younger daughter was placed in foster care. On the other hand, Christopher Bluml overcame the loss, the pain, and with the support of his family, he lived a positive life. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Candy Rogers. Candace Rogers, also known as Candy, was born on July 18, 1948, was either. After her birth, her parents divorced, but her father remained in the same city, allowing Candy to spend time with him regularly. As a child, she enjoyed the outdoors, often going for walks and playing with her dog. She also dreamed of joining the Campfire Girls, a girls-only organization similar to the Boy Scouts. In 1959, Candy joined the Campfire Girls at the age of 9. One of the organization's activities was selling mints door-to-door. On Friday, March 6th, she planned to sell mints after school. After returning home, having dinner, and playing with her dog. Then she took about 8 boxes of mints and headed out. Candy had planned to walk around her neighborhood and sell sweets to the people living nearby. To ensure that the other girls selling sweets in the area didn't overlap, each girl was assigned specific streets to visit. However, when Candy failed to return home by her expected time of 6 p.m., her mom started to worry. Candy's mom and grandfather set out to search for her, but they couldn't find her anywhere in the neighborhood. As darkness fell, the search party grew, with family, friends, and neighbors joining in to help. Despite their combined efforts, they were unable to find any sign of Candy. Convinced that something was wrong, Candy's mom decided to call the police. As the police joined the search, they began by questioning the neighbors. Their investigation revealed that she had only made 1 sale, suggesting that something may have happened to her soon after she left home. A witness reported seeing Candy on a nearby street around 6:30 p.m., which seemed unusual since her mother was already searching for her by then. Candy's grandfather reported some unusual incidents after going to search for his granddaughter. On the same street where a witness last saw Candy, he nearly got hit by a speeding green 1956 Ford. Although the police distributed the car's description, they were unable to locate it due to the lack of a license plate number. Later, at around 9 p.m., several mint boxes belonging to Candy were found along the road near a bridge, increasing the concern for her safety. The police intensified their search in this area, combing the riverbanks and a nearby wooded zone throughout the night. Unfortunately, Candy was not found. As news of Candy's disappearance spread, local newspapers covered the story, and it eventually gained statewide media attention. In 1959, child disappearances near their homes were extremely rare, making Candy's case even more disturbing. The residents of her town had not experienced a similar incident in many years, leaving them deeply shaken and concerned. The next morning, police increased their search by deploying more personnel and resources, including mounted police, off-road vehicles, and military members. A large number of volunteers from the city and surrounding areas joined the search, swelling the total number of search to over 1,000 people. This made it one of the largest searches in the country's history at the time. The search area was expanded to 11 miles around Candy's home, but despite this, no signs of her were found. Tragically, on the same day, a search helicopter clipped power lines and crashed, claiming the lives of 3 of its 5 crew members. Undeterred, the search efforts continued for many days, but yielded no results. Police officers worked tirelessly in multiple day and night to try and locate Candy. Investigators also followed up on approximately 750 tips received in the early days of the search, but unfortunately, every lead ended in a dead end. 15 days after Candy went missing, two military personnel on a hunting trip in the woods west of Spokane stumbled upon children's shoes on the ground. Recognizing the shoes as possibly belonging to Candy, they immediately reported their discovery to the police. The shoes were confirmed by Candy's grandfather. He said they were indeed hers. After discovering this clue, police conducted a search of the woods and they quickly found Candy's body, partially hidden in the underbrush and covered with pine branches. A medical examination revealed that the cause of death was strangulation, using a torn piece of fabric from Candy's own skirt. Injuries on Candy's hands and feet suggested that she had been tied up, although no ropes were found near. The police investigation showed that Candy had been sexually abused. During their search of the crime scene, the police discovered a green car seat cover nearby, although they were unable to establish if it was linked to the murder. A small, purple stain was also found on Candy's clothing, which gave off a strong scent of grape-flavored chewing gum. Despite all efforts, the police still could not find relevance between this stain and the case. With limited clues, police searched for any clues that might help them find the killer. They thoroughly investigated numerous tips and looked into the potential involvement of hundreds of people. This group included neighbors, people of interest, and previously convicted individuals. However, the investigation eventually narrowed down to focus on one particular suspect, Alfred Braves, a 50-year-old man. The reason Alfred became a suspect because, on the same day Candy's body was found, he died in his car, near where Candy's boxes of mints were found. Additionally, Alfred lived near Candy's home. Upon finding his body, police discovered a rope and a strand of hair that was not Alfred's, which belonged to a woman. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Alfred's home. Upon searching his house, they discovered numerous newspaper articles detailing sex crimes against women and girls. The police also found that several women had accused him of harassment, and even his own wife had suspicions about his involvement in Candy's murder. However, despite the suspicious circumstances, the police were unable to find any concrete evidence that directly linked Alfred to the crime. And investigators were hesitant to clear him of suspicion. In the face of a lack of evidence, detectives shifted their focus to other suspects. Over several months, the police diligently investigated each person, but every lead turned out to be a dead end. Later, investigators found another suspect, a serial killer named Hugh Morse. He was arrested in 1961 for a string of crimes. The important evidence that Hugh was involved in Candy's case was that he had a habit of chewing grape-flavored gum, which was similar to a substance found on Candy's clothes. Furthermore, additionally, he had committed 2 murders in Spokane a few months after Candy's death, further increasing the suspicion of his involvement in the crime. Hugh began committing crimes quite early. His first arrest was for assaulting a woman, but the penalty was lenient. He was merely discharged from the army. He then went on to commit multiple robberies in Los Angeles and served only a 6-month sentence. After being released, Hugh tricked 2 8-year-old girls into going with him to a secluded area by promising them ice cream. He then sexually assaulted them. This crime led to his arrest. However, instead of going to prison, a medical commission determined that he was a sexual psychopath. As a result, he was placed in a mental health facility for a period of 2 years to receive treatment. After his release, doctors thought Hugh had fully recovered. He then moved to Spokane, where he began peeping into women's windows. His actions took a more severe turn in November 1959, when he broke into the home of a 28-year-old woman and acted violently, ultimately killing her. 10 months later, Hugh entered the residence of a 69-year-old woman, repeating the same crimes as before. A month after that, he assaulted another woman, stabbing her multiple times. Although she sustained severe injuries, she managed to survive the attack. After escaping the city, he continued a devastating crime spree over several months, brutally attacking and sexually assaulting numerous women and girls with a knife, ultimately claiming the lives of 2 more victims. To evade capture, Hugh constantly moved from city to city and state to state until the FBI intervened. He was eventually added to the list of the country's 10 most wanted fugitives, which ultimately led to his capture. Hugh received multiple life sentences, but his troubles didn't end there. He attempted to end his life in his cell. Fortunately, the guards intervened in time and saved him, allowing him to continue serving his sentence. Detectives in Candy's case visited Hugh in prison multiple times, trying to gather information about the case. Despite repeatedly denying any involvement, he took a polygraph test to prove his innocence. The test results suggested he was telling the truth, but these results are considered unreliable and therefore cannot be used as evidence in court. At the time of the murder, Hugh lived in Spokane, and furthermore, he had a criminal record of similar incidents that made investigators suspicious. They initially considered him the primary suspect due to he familiar with this neighborhood. But he consistently denied any involvement. Although they suspected him, they did not have enough evidence to conclude his involvement in the crime. The police then shifted their attention to another suspect, 49 years old Howard Barnett. He was arrested in February 1960 for allegedly molesting a minor girl. Shortly after his arrest, he ended his life right in his cell at the Spokane police station. Hugh wrote a cryptic message in his own blood on the wall before his death, stating, "He have a sin before the Lord." However, it wasn't until after he passed away that his wife became aware of his arrest. She then asked the police if they thought Hugh might have been involved in Candy's death. Despite several investigations, no concrete evidence was found to connect he to the crime. The police continued to pursue new leads over the years, looking into other possible suspects. A woman came forward with information, stating that on the day of Candy's disappearance, she saw a green car following her. Police reopened the case multiple times but were unable to gather evidence linking the green car or any other. The case was reopened periodically over the years but always hit a dead end. The investigation into Candy's murder was complicated by numerous false confessions. 13 individuals came forward claiming to be the killer, but when questioned by the police, they couldn't provide any details that only the real killer would know. Instead, they simply repeated details they had read in the newspapers. The police department changed personnel a lot during the investigation. However, none were able to solve the case, allowing Candy's murder to remain one of the state's most notorious and baffling crimes. The crime had a profound impact on the local community, leading many parents to reevaluate their perception of safety and ultimately changing the way they supervised their children's outdoor activities. In the early 2000s, the case was reopened, and a new detective used modern technologies to help with the investigation. Fortunately, the police had collected and preserved crucial evidence in 1959, which allowed experts to take another look. By using modern DNA analysis, they were able to identify a male semen sample on the Candy's clothing. Further analysis of the DNA sample was done to create a profile, which was then entered into the FBI database, but yielded no matches. Investigators also compared the DNA to samples from multiple suspects, but none of them matched. For many years, people suspected Hugh Morse of committing the crime, but forensic evidence revealed no link between him and the murder. As a result, the investigation stalled once again. Although the police had a DNA sample from the perpetrator who sexually assaulted and killed Candy, identifying the individual continued to elude them. In 2021, authorities reopened the case, and a new detective chose to use genetic genealogy, a cutting-edge DNA analysis method, had already solved numerous cold cases. By applying this innovative approach, the detective hoped that the case will be solved. The detective reached out to several labs that specialized in the analysis he needed, but they all shared the same frustrating news. They concluded the sample had deteriorated too much, making it impossible to extract the necessary information. Undeterred, the detective contacted one final lab, and it has provided new clues that are helpful to the investigation. Armed with state-of-the-art tools, the experts were able to analyze the samples successfully and generate a DNA profile of the perpetrator. This profile was then uploaded to genealogical databases, allowing investigators to begin searching for the DNA owner's relatives. After carefully examining thousands of individuals, then they narrowed down their focus to one specific family. Upon investigating this family, the investigators discovered that the DNA sample likely came from one of 3 brothers, but all 3 brothers had passed away. However, one of the brothers had a living daughter. The police reached out to her about the possibility that her father might have been involved in the murder. Despite her initial shock, she agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The woman provided a DNA sample, which was compared to the semen found on Candy's clothing. The results confirmed that she was closely related to culprit, who left the DNA evidence on Candy's clothing. Based on this new information, the police obtained a court order to exhume the woman's father's grave. DNA experts extracted a DNA profile from his remains and compared it to semen found on Candy's clothing. After a 62-year wait, the results revealed a definitive match between the DNA from the woman's father and the semen found on Candy's clothing. This confirmed that the perpetrator was a man named John Ryhoff. John Ryhoff was not initially identified as a suspect following Candy's murder. However, detectives later investigated his biography and found links to other crimes. At the time of the murder, John was 20 years old and lived within a mile of Candy's house. He was also stationed at an army base near where her body was discovered. 2 years after the murder, John committed another crime when he attacked a woman, binding and sexually assaulting her, then attempting to kill her. The woman managed to survive the attack. As a result of the assault, John was arrested and sentenced to 6 months in prison. He also received a dishonorable discharge from the army. Upon his release from prison, John started a family and has 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. He kept a low profile and appeared to be living an ordinary life, working multiple jobs. One of these jobs was at a food packaging plant, where he suffered a severe chemical burn to his face and leaving a scar. John finally ended his life in June 1970, at the age of 31, leaving no note or explanation. The authorities determined that the victim, Candy, may have known her killer, John. Candy's friend, who was 10 years old at the time of the murder, was revealed to be the killer's sister. Years later, she recalled how she cried in her brother's, John's arms after learning about Candy's death. Unaware that he was the person responsible. Sadly, Candy's parents did not live to see their daughter's case solved. Candy's mother passed away in 2006, and her father died life in 1963, for years after Candy's murder, likely due to his inability to cope with his loss. After 62 years, the case was finally solved, marking one of the longest investigations in history. The investigation involved multiple detectives from different generations. At the press conference announcing the killer's identity, only one officer who worked on the case in 1959 was present. He expressed gratitude for having lived long enough to see the case resolved and to finally know the truth. The daughter of the killer, John Ryhoff, initially struggled to accept that her father committed such a heinous crime. However, she eventually came to terms with the fact, describing her father as a monster who took an innocent girl's life. She has expressed regret that her father was not held accountable for his actions during his lifetime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of McDermott family. Mark McDermott was born in the early 1960s in Australia. But we know that Mark was the eldest of 5 siblings. Known family members include his father, Bruce McDermott, and 2 sisters, Tracy and Nicole, with Nicole being the youngest. According to those close to him, Mark was not only a successful businessman but also a kind and easygoing person. Nicole described her brother as a wonderful person who avoided causing harm to others. Information about Mark's life is limited, especially regarding his adult life. However, we do know for sure that he traveled to the southern United States, although the reasons and circumstances are unclear. It was there that he met Johanna Dunn, a single mother raising a 4-year-old son, Donald Dunn. Donald Wayne Dunn was born in the early 1990s in West Virginia and lived there with his mother's family all his life. His grandparents played a major role in Donald's early upbringing, as they cared for him most of the time. Donald's mother, Johanna, was a single working mother who found raising a child difficult, so she asked her grandparents to help. On the rare occasions when Johanna and Donald were home together, she would often entertain him with video games or television. This reflected Johanna's difficulty in giving her son her full attention, although they tried to make time for each other. Their lives changed when Mark came along. Johanna and Mark quickly fell in love and married. Johanna took her husband's last name, and the three of them moved to West Virginia, becoming a happy family. From the beginning, Mark and Donald were very close, as if they were related by blood. Their relatives, including Mark's sister and father, confirmed that Mark treated Donald like his own son, and Donald also considered Mark his only father. The relationship between Donald and Mark was very close, which was evident when Donald was young. During the difficult times when Mark and Johanna were temporarily separated, Donald was still determined to stay with Mark instead of his mother. At the same time, the family faced a great challenge when Johanna was diagnosed with cancer. However, thanks to their support and solidarity, they overcame these difficulties together. Mark always took good care of his stepson, ensuring that Donald had a comfortable and fulfilling life. Although Donald is a simple man and does not ask for much, he is very grateful for the peaceful and luxurious life his stepfather has created for him. When Donald graduated from high school in 2008, Mark covered the entire cost of his college education. Donald attended Rio Salado College for the first 2 years, then transferred to Marshall University in 2010. Throughout this time, Mark continued to financially support Donald's education. Donald lives with his girlfriend and her family. He and his girlfriend have been in love since they were 15 years old. Despite this, Mark and Johanna have always been very supportive of Donald. They not only pay for Donald's tuition but also support him financially in many other ways. Specifically, they cover the costs of Donald's clothes, car insurance, daily living expenses, and food. Donald dedicates all his time and effort to studying. As a responsible and diligent student, he always strictly follows his daily study schedule. He often refuses or cancels plans to meet friends and relatives, citing the need to complete assignments or study for exams. Donald prioritizes studying above everything else in his life. During his 5 years in college, he always tried his best to graduate on time and not fall behind in any semester. May 25, 2013, a Saturday, was supposed to be the big day when he received his university diploma. However, instead of being the joyous occasion he had planned, the day turned into a heartbreaking moment that would change his life forever. While the McDermott family was preparing for Donald's graduation, an emergency call was placed from their home to 911. Johanna called the police and admitted that she had shot her husband. She insisted that the act was intentional, not an accident. Police quickly arrived at the McDermott family home. Sergeant Greg Kean of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office was one of the first law enforcement officers to arrive. When he got to the scene, he noticed that Johanna appeared to be in a state of severe shock. As he entered the home, he found Mark lying motionless on the couch in the living room. He appeared to have been reading a book when he died. Initially, Sergeant Greg noticed that he had 2 gunshot wounds to the head. However, when investigators moved the body, they discovered a third wound behind the shoulder. The medical examiner at the scene confirmed that the cause of death was head injuries, but it was possible that Mark did not die immediately after being shot. There was a lot of blood at the crime scene, suggesting that Mark had been losing blood over time before his death. According to initial reports, Donald was taking a shower to prepare for his important day. The sound of the running water from the shower drowned out the gunshots. So Donald did not hear Johanna shoot her stepfather. It was only when Donald emerged from the shower that he discovered Mark's body in the living room. On the dining room table was a pistol and a letter, presumably written by Johanna to Donald's son. In the letter, Johanna expressed her grief and explained that her marriage had become unbearable. She could no longer live with a man she did not love anymore. Johanna also apologized for leaving Donald's life when he was still a minor. At that time, Johanna and Donald were taken to the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office in a private car, where a police officer took their statements. Since Johanna was the one who called the police, the incident was initially treated as a serious case of domestic violence. In the call to the dispatcher, Johanna stated that after an argument with Mark, she had shot him in the head with a pistol in a fit of rage without realizing what she was doing. However, she later changed her story, denying what she had said before. This caught the police by surprise and forced them to adjust the entire investigation. After getting into the police car, Johanna suddenly revealed the truth that it was not her, but her son Donald who killed Mark. However, this was just the tip of the iceberg. The story was actually much more complicated than what the investigators initially thought. Johanna entered the interrogation room and met with Captain James Barr from the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office. She detailed the events that had occurred on May 25, 2013. According to Johanna, her son was scheduled to attend his graduation that morning. Before that, she had gone out to run some errands and buy groceries. Johanna had just arrived home and was about to get out of the car when Donald approached her. He asked his mother to close her eyes and follow him into the house, saying that there was a surprise. Trusting her son, Johanna complied and walked into the dining room. Donald told his mother to sit down. Suddenly, Johanna heard a distinct clicking sound. When she opened her eyes to look at her son, she was horrified to see Donald pointing his own pistol at her. The gun failed to fire, and Johanna panicked, trying to wrestle it from her son. She tried to calm down, think clearly, and make a plan to save herself from becoming Donald's victim. Seeing Mark's body, she quickly told her son that she would call 911 and take the blame for him. Although Donald was initially skeptical, he eventually agreed to his mother's plan. During her interrogation, Johanna explained why she called 911 and incriminated herself. She did so to protect herself from Donald, even though she knew she would go to jail. She believed that if she did not, Donald would kill her. Johanna expressed shock that her son would point the gun at her head and pull the trigger, something she never thought would happen in her 23 years of being a mother. The gun belonged to her. She explained that the reason the gun did not fire was probably because Donald had pulled the trigger of the semi-automatic gun too far, preventing it from firing normally. Captain James thought Johanna's story was very plausible. From the moment he met Donald, he felt something was wrong. He noticed that Donald, a 23-year-old young man, was too calm for this serious situation. His face always remained neutral, showing no emotion. Therefore, he decided to put him in a separate interrogation room, away from his mother. From the beginning of the interrogation, Donald denied any involvement in his stepfather's death. However, after being informed of Johanna's testimony, his denial quickly collapsed. James did not need to use any threats or pressure to force Donald to confess. Instead, he voluntarily recounted the whole incident, revealing every detail of the case. The story Donald told was almost unbelievable. This story begins after Donald completed his first year of college. It was clear that his academic performance was not good, and due to his low grades, he decided to drop out of school. Donald shared that at first, his courses were easy and he could get good grades just by showing up to class on time. As the semester progressed, he encountered more and more difficulties in his studies. He felt that he was not capable of continuing. Instead of admitting the truth, he decided to lie to Mark and Johanna. Not only were his close friends deceived, but his girlfriend and her family were also unaware of his true situation. According to Rachel Rush, Donald's girlfriend's sister, he created a false impression that he was studying. Donald maintained a student-like schedule, leaving and returning home at fixed times. He spent most of the day in his room and asked not to be disturbed, citing the need to focus on homework or studying for exams. To create a more convincing appearance, Donald even falsified his transcripts. This was a deliberate deception that lasted for 4.5 years. No one in Donald's life realized that he was lying to them. Donald's family trusted him completely during the time he pretended to be a student. Johanna and Mark had no idea that their son had abused the financial and emotional support they had given him all this time. Donald admitted that he had no intention of deceiving his family at first, but as time went on, it became more and more difficult to confess the truth. The main reason he could not tell the truth was because he was afraid that Mark and Johanna would stop paying for all his expenses. Although he appeared to not care much about material things like cars or expensive clothes, he did not want to give up his current lifestyle. He was well aware that he would lose a lot if his parents found out the truth. For a long time, Donald had been meticulously planning to escape all trouble. From the beginning, he had planned to kill his parents to avoid suspicion. Donald planned to leave a note similar to the one found on the dining table along with the pistol. He believed that when the police read the note, they would conclude that this was the crime of an unhappy woman who saw no other way but to kill herself. Donald told Captain James that on May 25th, he had secretly taken Johanna's pistol and kept it with him all day, pretending to be preparing for his graduation ceremony. Before carrying out the rest of his plan, he decided to go to the supermarket to have his image recorded by the surveillance cameras, in order to use this evidence to prove his innocence. Before the murder, Donald had begun to show an interest in shooting practice. Although his best friend Alex Willis found this strange, Alex did not suspect anything as he did not think Donald would want to use a gun to attack someone. Donald's considerations and conclusions left everyone who heard them afterwards confused. James shared that this young man admitted that he had even planned the emotions he would express on his face when the police arrived at the scene. He also thought about how he would support himself after losing the steady income provided by Mark, and decided to take advantage of the sympathy of his loved ones as long as he could. While his family supported him, he decided to take up sports to improve his health and fitness. If he had no other choice, he would consider joining the police force or the army. When considering the possibility of his plan succeeding, Donald realized that it would be easier to kill his mother and stepfather than to admit that he had been lying to them for nearly 5 years. In April 2016, the West Virginia Supreme Court released a legal opinion. According to the opinion, Donald was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder 1 month after his arrest in June 2013. Even before the trial, Donald and his legal team sought to delay the trial. A few weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, the defendant, Donald Dunn, who had been held in solitary confinement, underwent surgery on his right hand. His attorneys used the surgery as a reason to request a delay, arguing that during the initial hearings, he would be under the influence of strong painkillers. To decide this issue, the court first requested his medical records. However, this request was denied on the grounds that, at the preliminary hearing, there was no evidence that Donald was partially incapacitated due to the use of painkillers. Therefore, the court determined that he was competent to attend trial and approved the continuation of the scheduled trial. The trial took place in August 2014, over a year after Mark's death. It was presided over by Judge John Hutchinson, with David White representing Donald and Christine Keller from the Raleigh County Prosecutor's Office. Mark's two sisters, along with one of their nieces, traveled more than 15,000 kilometers from Australia to attend the trial of the man they had considered a family member for nearly 20 years. Although there were no details from witness testimony or evidence presented to the jury, and no photographs or video footage, the defense wanted to include in their opening argument that Donald was under the influence of illegal drugs at the time of the crime. However, there was no evidence that this had ever been mentioned before or confirmed by any toxicology tests. On August 14, 2014, Donald Dunn was convicted of the murder of his stepfather, Mark McDermott, the attempted murder of his mother, Johanna McDermott, and the use of a firearm. About a month later, on September 5 of the same year, Judge John Hutchinson sentenced Donald Dunn to life in prison without parole for the murder of his stepfather and 15 years in prison for the attempted murder of his mother. After the verdict was announced, Johanna read an emotional letter to the court. In the letter, Donald's mother mentioned that something unfortunate had happened in her son's life. This could have been due to the decline in health of his grandparents, the pressure she put on him to go to college, or his exposure to violent video games at a very young age. She expressed her disapproval of the way her son was perceived by the public and stated that she did not agree with his sentence. However, Judge John explained that Johanna's objections did not affect his decision. He felt that the sentence he imposed was the only way to restore justice in an unjust situation. He sympathized with the defendant's mother, who, despite the circumstances, wanted to protect her son from the consequences of his actions. After the verdict, Mark's sister and father still could not understand how Donald could take the life of a man who had raised him as his own son for 19 years. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Catherine Pileggi. Ronald Vinci was born on August 16, 1940, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. From a young age, he showed a natural talent for entrepreneurship. In his 20s, he started his first business by renting a space on the Pacific Coast to sell Honda motorcycles. Over time, his small shop grew into one of the largest Honda dealership centers in the state. As his business success continued to grow, so did his wealth. Ronald expanded his business by opening more car dealerships, which significantly increased his earnings. Those who worked for him often described him as a strong-willed and determined individual. In his personal life, Ronald Vinci was married to a woman named Pamela, with whom he had a son named Carrie. However, their marriage eventually ended in divorce. After his divorce, Ronald began living a more extravagant lifestyle, spending his wealth on luxury items such as expensive toys, airplanes, and helicopters. His passion for collecting aircraft led him to acquire a large hangar to house his extensive collection. Ronald simplified his daily commute to work by securing government approval to build a helicopter pad on his property, despite some of his neighbors opposing the idea. Having the helicopter pad allowed him to commute to work directly from home by helicopter. He also had helicopter pads installed on the roofs of his car dealerships, making it easier for him to travel by air. Ronald, then 50 years old, met 34 years old Catherine in 1990. At the time, Catherine worked as a flight attendant. She originally from a family in a rural area of Georgia. Growing up, she participated in local beauty pageants where her bright smile and charisma easily captivated people. Her striking beauty and cheerful personality earned her many admirers. After completing her education, Catherine worked as a lab technician at a veterans hospital for several years. However, she felt unfulfilled and longed for more in life. Seeking a change, Catherine left her job in 1980 to join Delta Airlines as a flight attendant, earning an annual income of $20,000. She enjoyed her new role, taking care of passengers and serving meals, and even acquired useful tips like using coffee grounds to eliminate unpleasant odors on airplane seats. 10 years into her career as a flight attendant, Catherine's life took a dramatic turn. In 1990, she met Ronald Vinci, a millionaire, on a flight. Despite their 14-year age difference, they fell in love, drawn to each other's charming personalities. Catherine eventually left her job and moved into Ronald's luxurious California home. Together, they shared a passion for travel and explored various destinations, with Aspen, Colorado, being a favorite getaway spot. Ronald and Catherine were in a decade-long relationship, but Ronald never proposed to Catherine. Eventually, they decided to part ways. Catherine moved to Florida, seeking a fresh start and a new partner. In April 2001, at age 45, Catherine began a relationship with 63-year-old Dilio Carano, a financially stable insurance agent, after being introduced by mutual friends. She shared with Dilio her previous unhappy relationship with Ronald, explained that it was a difficult time, filled with arguments, excessive drinking, and infidelity. Ronald had never proposed, despite her decade-long hope for marriage. Dilio promptly proposed to Catherine, and they got married in May 2001, just a month after meeting. After their wedding, the couple settled in Miami Beach, Florida, and Catherine seemed content with the marriage. Dilio describes Catherine's initial demeanor as being like a house cat, gentle, calm, and eating very little. In addition, Catherine is very afraid of water. She cannot bathe in the ocean, sea, or river. A few months into their marriage, Dilio noticed a dramatic change in Catherine's behavior. She began asking him for large sums of money, insisting that he buy her clothes and gifts. She would often compare him to her friends' more generous husbands. According to Dilio, Catherine was taking about $55,000 per month from him. She claimed the money was for education expenses, but never provided any receipts. After a few months of this financial strain, Dilio realized he had made a mistake by rushing into the marriage. He decided he wanted a divorce. The separation process was relatively easy, as they had no children or shared assets. Court documents revealed that Dilio's net worth was $4.5 million, while Catherine had only $8,000 in her accounts. As Catherine prepared to move out of Dilio's house, she was overwhelmed with sadness and despair. In 2005, Ronald Vinci, a wealthy millionaire, made a big change by moving to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where friends had convinced him he would enjoy a favorable climate and low taxes. Prior to the move, Ronald had sold his car dealerships and amassed a substantial fortune. He purchased a luxurious fourth-floor apartment in Fort Lauderdale and soon reconnected with Catherine, a flight attendant he had previously dated. Catherine moved in with Ronald, and they rekindled their romance. Coincidentally, Catherine's ex-husband, Dilio Carano, lived in the same building but 30 floors. Dilio was perplexed by Catherine's decision to reconnect with Ronald, whom she had previously described as a monster. Neither Ronald nor Catherine go to work. They enjoyed a life of leisure, but their differences became increasingly apparent. Ronald struggled with his weight due to his love of rich foods, while Catherine maintained a strict diet and a very low weight of 42 kilograms. Ronald and Catherine had distinct personalities. Ronald loved attending lively parties, whereas Catherine preferred quieter evenings at home, often lost in crime novels. She favored casual clothing like shorts and sneakers. Despite their contrasting tastes, they commonly traveled together, exploring the Caribbean islands by air and sailing across the ocean. However, she struggled with aquaphobia, and her diary entries revealed her intense fear of the ocean. Ronald consistently encouraged Catherine to overcome her fear, and she made an effort to join him on these adventures despite her anxieties. This suggests Ronald had a strong influence over her. When not traveling, Ronald and Catherine would often host gatherings at their home. During these events, Ronald enjoyed great food and drinks, frequently ordering $1 tacos and strong beverages when out with friends at budget-friendly bars along the Fort Lauderdale waterfront. On occasion, he would embarrass Catherine by implying she was entirely dependent on him. Despite this, Catherine remained calm and composed. However, Catherine maintained her composure. She would quietly cater to Ronald's needs, especially when he had been drinking, by serving drinks and snacks and attending to his friends. Ronald's relationship with Catherine persisted for 5 years, despite his increasing hesitation to propose marriage. By 2010, he began sharing his feelings with friends, revealing his desire to end the relationship and find a younger partner. In early 2011, Ronald was hospitalized due to severe intestinal issues, which his doctors attributed to his years of excessive alcohol consumption. Prior to the hospitalization, Ronald had noticed an unusual change in the taste of his food, which sparked concern for his health. A friend joked that Catherine might have tried to poison him, but Ronald dismissed the idea without considering it seriously. Ronald's health issues mainly stemmed from his poor self-care. His frequent consumption of alcohol and pills, which he used to unwind and sleep, had severe negative effects on his body. Ronald Vinci purchased a $3 million waterfront home in Fort Lauderdale in June 2011, where he planned to spend his retirement. The 70-year-old millionaire looked forward to visits from his son, Kerry, and his grandson. Kerry worked as a waiter, a job that Ronald often teased his about, Ronald jokingly suggesting he was holding out for his inheritance. Tragedy struck on the afternoon of June 28, 2011. When Ronald's gardener called 911, reporting an incident at the mansion. Upon arrival, police found Ronald's lifeless body in a guest bedroom, wrapped in plastic bags and tightly sealed with tape inside a sleeping bag. Additionally, the sleeping bag contained soiled sheets and was covered with what appeared to be wet dirt, later confirmed to be coffee grounds. A further investigation revealed a slashed mattress. The gardener told the police that Catherine had said Ronald fell down the stairs, hit his head, and died. However, the officers were not convinced it was an accident. During questioning, the gardener provided a disturbing account of the incident before finding Ronald Vinci's body. When the gardener arrived at the Ronald residence in the morning, after receiving an urgent call from Catherine late at night, he was met with an horrific scene. Ronald's lifeless body was wrapped tightly in a sleeping bag in a guest bedroom. Catherine, visibly upset, begged the gardener to help her bury Ronald, revealing that Ronald wanted to be laid to rest in the ocean after his death. To fulfill this wish, Catherine had bought a blue container for Ronald's body, intending to take it out to sea on Ronald's yacht. Catherine had already stored the container in her garage before authorities were notified by the gardener. The medical examiner's thorough examination revealed horrific findings. 70-year-old Ronald had suffered from 9 stab wounds to his chest and neck, had injuries consistent with being hit by a hammer, and was ultimately killed by a gunshot wound to the head. Earlier, on the evening of June 27, friends gathered at Ronald's house. Catherine prepared a meal for the guests, while Ronald served drinks. The evening seemed normal at first, but it quickly turned into a tragic one. On the evening in question, Ronald reported that his passport and one of his pistols were missing during dinner. He also complained about the food, saying it was unusually bitter. Feeling unwell, Ronald unexpectedly went to bed at 7:30 p.m. A departure from his usual late-night routine. His friends found this early bedtime suspicious and eventually left his house. Later that night, Catherine was brought in for questioning. In her confession, she described a confrontation with Ronald, which occurred around 1 a.m. on June 28. According to she, a drunk Ronald woke up and began verbally insulting her. The situation escalated, resulting in Ronald chasing her down the stairs. However, he lost his balance, stumbled, and fell, hitting his head severely. Catherine claimed that she helped Ronald up and led him to a guest bedroom on the first floor. After cleaning the blood stains on the stairs, she checked on him a few hours later and found him asleep with a loaded gun. Catherine stated that she feared for her life, believing Ronald might kill her. In a state of fear and desperation, she grabbed the gun and shot Ronald in the head. During the interrogation, Catherine explained her actions, saying she was consumed by fear and anger, feeling as though her soul had left her body. After the shooting, Catherine further injured Ronald by stabbing him with a knife and hitting him with a hammer. She then wrapped his body in a bag in an attempt to hide the evidence. Realizing she needed help, Catherine contacted someone known as the gardener for assistance with disposing of the body. Before hiding the body, Catherine purchased a large container from a hardware store, intending to use it to dispose of Ronald's body in the ocean. This was confirmed by surveillance camera photos. Subsequent investigations uncovered a gun in Catherine's car, with her fingerprints on it, matching the gun used to shoot Ronald. Her car also contained a knife, pieces of a cut-up mattress, clothing, rubber gloves, all stained with Ronald's blood. Catherine was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Just a month before the crime, she had been involved in a dispute with her sister. Catherine's sister claimed that she had borrowed money and refused to pay it back. But she maintained that the money was a gift and therefore did not owe her sister anything. Ronald's neighbors reported hearing screams coming from his house on the night of the murder. Additionally, a witness spotted a white vehicle with a large trailer near Ronald's house early in the morning. The car belonged to the gardener. According to Ronald's friends, he had been trying to end his relationship with Catherine for some time. The couple had been experiencing marital problems, including a lack of intimacy, and had been sleeping in separate rooms for months. In an attempt to finalize the separation, Ronald had tried to give she $1 million, just weeks before the tragedy, asking her to leave their house permanently. Prosecutors suspect Catherine's main motive was fear of losing her wealthy partner, Ronald. In contrast, Catherine's defense team argued that she was a victim of severe abuse and had acted in self-defense. Several questions arose during the trial, including why Catherine didn't immediately contact the police, why she initially lied about the incident, and why she endured years of abuse without leaving Ronald. Catherine's relatives testified in her defense, and a court psychiatrist identified signs of domestic abuse. However, none of Ronald's close friends or associates witnessed or reported any mistreatment in their relationship. Instead, they described she as calm and content, never complaining about her life. During the trial, Catherine made a surprising accusation against Ronald, claiming that he was responsible for the sudden and mysterious death of her younger sister, Angela, in December 2009. Catherine, Ronald, and Angela went on a Caribbean cruise together. Angela struggled with substance abuse and, during a party on the ship, she drank excessively, leading to severe illness and intense convulsions. In an attempt to save her sister, Catherine performed CPR, but unfortunately, Angela's heart stopped and she passed away. It was later discovered that Ronald had given Angela some pills on the evening of the cruise, which allegedly were intended to help her relax. Catherine strongly believed that these pills played a role in her sister's death. However, in an unexpected turn of events, Catherine was found guilty of Ronald's murder in 2014. The jury delivered a verdict that resulted in Catherine being sentenced to 25 years in prison. She is currently serving her sentence at the LEL Correctional Institution in Marin County, Florida, and is set to be released in January 2034 at the age of 77. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Nancy Lagerquist. Nancy Lagerquist, an 87-year-old woman, was a resident at the Riverside Healthcare Center, where she had lived since 1988. She was born in 1902 in Hamilton, Montana, and she spent much of her life working as an executive secretary. She was also an active member of the Missoula Business and Professional Women's Club before her retirement. She remained single for her entire life and did not have any children. When she passed away, she also did not have many relatives. On July 1, 1990, Nancy was seen sleeping in her bed by a care worker at 3:30 a.m. 1 hour later, at 4:30 a.m., the care worker checked on her room again but found her missing. This caused alarm and prompted 5 staff members on the shift to conduct a search. Despite their efforts, Nancy was nowhere to be found. At 4:41 a.m., the police were notified about her disappearance. It is worth noting that Nancy required around-the-clock assistance as she was unable to walk. Before her disappearance, she had been living an ordinary life at the care home, with nothing in her background suggesting she was at risk. Law enforcement and search and rescue teams arrived quickly at the scene. They searched the home and the surrounding area thoroughly. Since the home was located along the Clark Fork River, police officers in boats also searched the water. At 6:30 a.m., they stopped searching. Authorities found Nancy's body near the riverbank, about 30 minutes downstream from Riverside. She was the victim of a brutal murder involving sexual assault. Afterward, her body was thrown into the water. 2 investigators working on the case quickly realized the enormity of the challenge ahead. The discovery of Nancy's body in the water resulted in the destruction of any forensic evidence. Additionally, several key pieces of evidence, including Nancy's missing diaper and the possible murder weapon, were never found, leaving the police with unanswered questions. Detectives theorized that the perpetrator entered and exited Nancy's room through the window facing the river. To do this, they cut the window screen, but left no evidence on the window, windowsill, or anywhere else in the room. It is also puzzling that none of the home's alarm systems were triggered during the entry, and further checks revealed that all alarms were working properly at the time. A key witness reported seeing a man near the crime scene around 4 a.m. He walked through the parking lot of the Missoula Athletic Club, moving away from the river toward East Broadway Street. This individual was approximately 30 to 40 years old, 180 to 200 pounds, and had distinct physical features, including light brown collar-length hair, a mustache, and brown-rimmed glasses. He wore an untucked, striped white and brown t-shirt, which was longer at the back, along with tan shorts and white tennis shoes. The man was not considered a suspect in the case, but the police did want to question him. Nancy had very few relatives, so investigators quickly dismissed a family-related motive for the murder. They shifted their focus to the care home staff. Considering that a staff member would be familiar with the layout and security measures of the facility, leading them to suspect that the murder could be an inside job. This led authorities to concentrate on a particular male staff member. He was eventually cleared, but he left the care home less than a month later for unclear reasons. The police investigation shifted from focusing on a staff member to the possibility of an outside perpetrator. They observed that the home's security measures concentrated on the doors rather than the windows, leading them to speculate that the victim, Nancy, might have been targeted simply because her room faced the river, with no specific motive for the attack. During the investigation, a man named James Bailey was interviewed multiple times, but was eventually cleared as a suspect. Detectives have been reviewing witness statements to look for any other suspicious deaths at the nursing home. Their attention was drawn to the case of 86-year-old Bertha Scott, an Alzheimer's patient who passed away in her bed on May 2, 1990. At the time, her death was attributed to natural causes, as she had heart disease and was frequently restrained at night to prevent her from wandering. However, one nurse reported an unusual detail, a bruise on Bertha's neck, which they found suspicious. Bertha died and was buried without an autopsy being performed. Around the time of her death, staff members at her care home noticed some minor tampering with the windows in the physical therapy room. Based on a nurse's comments, the police decided to exhume Bertha's body to re-examine her cause of death. The police later revealed to her family that she had been raped, then she being strangled to death, leaving them in shock. Bertha's life is very different from Nancy's. Born in Pennsylvania in 1904, and Bertha married 20 years later. 2 years before her death, she moved to Missoula to be closer to her children. Although 4 of her 6 children had passed away before her, she left behind numerous grandchildren. During the medical examination of Bertha's body, semen was found, and the sample was collected. Unfortunately, the sample was too degraded to produce a DNA profile, therefore was unable to help the police identify her killer. Both cases eventually came to a dead end. In 1992, authorities investigated a suspect who was guilty of sexually assaulting a nursing home resident, but he had an alibi since he was in prison during the murders. The same year, Lloyd Chase Allen was also identified as a suspect, but he too was incarcerated at the time. In 2002, the Missoulian reported that several residents of the care home described a mysterious man who would walk the halls at night. There are concerns about the accuracy of the information provided by these residents, so it's difficult to determine whether this man actually existed. As a result, it is that additional unsolved cases exist. Without DNA evidence or further investigation, a resolution to this case seems unlikely. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Quesera Pretty Places. Quesera Pretty Places was born on August 14, 2001. She grew up in a large family and was a member of the Crow and North Cheyenne Native American reservations in Montana. As a teenager, she was an exceptional athlete, enjoying various sports including basketball, football, running, cross-country, and wrestling. She also had a passion for the arts, performing in plays and singing in her high school choir at Hardin High School. Quesera is a kind and compassionate person, always caring and understanding to those she comes into contact with. In her free time, she often cared for stray animals. Her lifelong dream was to become a performer, aspiring to act and sing, with a bright future ahead of her. However, her life was tragically cut short shortly after she turned 18. Quesera was last seen in the rural town of Hardin, near the Crow Reservation, on August 24, 2019. She lives with her grandmother, who is named Yolanda Frazier. People did not know where she went, but it was clear that she did not return home. Quesera planned to meet her mother the following day for a trip to North Dakota but failed to appear. Her family began to worry when Quesera, no responding to texts, didn't answer calls, and was inactive on social media. This was unusual for her, raising concerns that something was amiss. Quesera's aunt, Priscilla Bulltail, went to the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office to report Quesera's niece missing. However, the office told her that she would have to wait a while before filing a report. This information proved to be false. In Montana, because Quesera was under 21 and considered a minor, police were required to conduct an immediate search. Despite this, it wasn't until August 27 that the missing persons report was finally allowed to be filed by Quesera's family. Quesera's family felt that the police did not take her disappearance seriously, they failing to conduct a search and failing to distribute flyers after she went missing. When she went missing, police initially told Priscilla that Quesera was probably just out with friends. Quesera had previously struggled with alcohol issues, most notably when she was found unresponsive at school in 2019 due to intoxication and required emergency medical help. After her disappearance, her family waited anxiously for any information about her whereabouts. It wasn't until 5 days later, on August 29, that a jogger stumbled upon Quesera's body near a wood pile in a backyard at the intersection of Mitchell Avenue and Rangeview Drive in the Hardin suburb, the same area where she was last seen alive. Notably, the homeowner, who had no connection to Quesera, was away at the time of the discovery. Quesera's family was not immediately notified that a body had been found, and instead, they learned about the information through social media rumors. As the news spread, they became extremely concerned. Priscilla attempted to visit the scene to identify the body, but was denied access and she couldn't tell if it was Quesera or not. Local news outlets were also not alerted to the discovery of the body. Quesera's mother and Yolanda visited the local mortuary on September 1st to identify a body, but they were initially told it was not Quesera's. As a result, the family continued their search for her. It wasn't until 10 days later that the body was confirmed to be Quesera's. The coroner concluded that she died on August 26 and that her death was suspicious, requiring further investigation. However, due to the advanced decomposition of her remains, the exact cause of her death could not be determined. It was also not possible to rule out asphyxiation as a cause of death. Following Quesera's body discovery, her family urged law enforcement to investigate her death. However, the family soon encountered resistance from Terry Bullis, the county coroner and owned the local funeral home Bullis Mortuary. Terry informed Quesera's mother, Geraldine, on September 12 that her daughter's remains would have to be cremated in order for them to be returned to the family. This went against the family's cultural beliefs and also meant that no further examinations of the body would be possible. Moreover, the family had chosen the Dahl Funeral Home to handle the funeral arrangements, but Terry forced them to use his business, Bullis Mortuary Funeral Home. To the family's dismay, Quesera was cremated before her other relatives could even arrive in Hardin. On September 14, the family located the site where Quesera's body was discovered with the help of nearby relatives. A few days earlier, they had tried to visit the area, but were unable to, as the scene was no longer cordoned off and there were no boundaries to where the body was discovered. They met Jason Cummings, the neighbor who had found Quesera's body. He told them that he had suggested to the police to charge her phone so they could contact the family. Unfortunately, it seemed the police had ignored his suggestion. Jason also questioned the authorities for not sealing off the crime scene, causing evidence to be destroyed. 5 days after Quesera went missing, on September 19, her family contacted the media to raise awareness about the case. However, they were surprised to discover that local news outlets, including the Billings Gazette, were unaware of the situation. The Gazette said it called the sheriff's office daily for updates on the cases, but they were not notified about Quesera's case. On the same day, Quesera's mother, Geraldine, along with Quesera's father, Alan, met with Captain Mike Fuss from the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office. They questioned Captain Fuss about why he had not contacted them or returned their calls. Captain Mike explained that he had been preoccupied with other cases. When asked why the crime scene had not been sealed off, Captain Mike stated that according to protocol, if investigators arrived at the scene before uniformed officers, sealing off the scene was not necessary. However, if officers arrived first, the scene would be sealed off. Geraldine and Alan also inquired about Quesera's phone, asking why law enforcement had not charged it to examine her recent communications. Captain Mike seemed surprised that the family knew about this detail and explained that the battery was dead, so they did not attempt to use it. However, Quesera's family countered that the authorities could have charged the phone to access for recent activity. They initially claimed that not even the FBI could gain access to the phone's contents. Captain Mike reported that Quesera had apparently died from alcohol poisoning. However, her family's offer of a $5,000 reward for any information about her death. Mike's response was unexpected and surprising, revealing a clear expression of anger. Additionally, Mike revealed that the original investigator, Jeremy Middlestead, had resigned from the case, citing that he couldn't handle it. A number of new developments occurred during this time. Quesera's family was interviewed by law enforcement for the first time, and they also met with the Bighorn County Attorney, Jay Harris. Jay disclosed that the coroner, Terry Bullis, had a potential conflict of interest due to his roles as the owner of a funeral home business and the county medical examiner. Jay noted that under Terry's leadership, many deaths had been rapidly attributed to exposure to alcohol and natural causes. However, when the family sought answers to their questions, Jay was short-tempered and provided little clarity. On the 23rd, Quesera's family received notice that her missing person report had not been filed and that her name was not in the missing persons database. A week later, the FBI declined to take the case, stating they required more evidence that Quesera was murdered on the reservation. Notably, shortly before Quesera's disappearance, she recorded a video of her 15-year-old wheelchair-bound younger brother being beaten by several police officers and shared it on social media. The incident involved deputies from the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office, resulting in disciplinary actions against the officers involved. However, one of the policemen present at the scene where Quesera's body was found was said to be a policeman involved in the beating. This has raised suspicions that the police involved in Quesera's death chose not to investigate, possibly to retaliate against her, for her attempts to hold them responsible for her actions. 2 years after Quesera's death, new information surfaced in August 2021. 4 witnesses came forward with accounts of the incident that led to her death. Their statements are not entirely consistent, but they generally agree on what happened. The witnesses reported that an argument took place outside a house on Rangeview Drive around 3 a.m. on August 26, 2019. Quesera was involved in the argument with 3 other individuals, a 17-year-old girl, a 19-year-old woman, and a 23-year-old man. It was claimed that Quesera had been at the house earlier, and one of the occupants had bought her alcohol. At the time of her death, her blood alcohol level was 0.149. The argument prompted a nearby resident to set off their car alarm, hoping the noise would cause the group to leave. And the group dispersed in different directions. Quesera was last seen heading towards the area where her body was later found. Additional information was also revealed in the new report. Forensic analysis found no foreign DNA under Quesera's fingernails. Furthermore, it was discovered that Quesera had been diagnosed with asthma shortly before her disappearance. The case remains unsolved, and the authorities are still seeking information. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kristen Smart. Kristen Denise Smart was born on February 20, 1977, in Augsburg, Bavaria, West Germany. She was raised by her parents, Stan and Denise Smart. When she was young, the family moved to Stockton, California. She is the oldest of 3 children. Kristen's mother, Denise, often called her a dreamer. Kristen loved the ocean and had an adventurous spirit. She was truly passionate about experiencing life. Kristen graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton in 1995. Before college, she worked as a lifeguard and a summer camp counselor at Camp Mokulea in Hawaii. In 1996, Kristen enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. She was ambitious but indecisive. Kristen initially enrolled at Cal Poly to study architecture because she loved to draw, but later changed her major to communication studies. Denise said that Kristen wanted to travel the world as a reporter. On Memorial Day weekend in 1996, Kristen called home and left a voicemail, "Good news, good news. I'll call home Sunday." Kristen was in regular contact with her family every Sunday. That day, Kristen had attended an off-campus birthday party that Friday night. Her friend, Margarita Campos, recalled taking her there. Margarita said Kristen seemed a little upset that Margarita couldn't join her that night. Margarita's last words to Kristen were to be careful. Kristen was wearing a gray cropped t-shirt, black shorts, and red Puma sneakers. As the party was winding down, at 2 a.m., classmate Tim Davis found Kristen unconscious on the grass nearby. He and another classmate and acquaintance of Kristen's, Cheryl Anderson, helped her walk back to the school dormitory. Paul Flores then approached Kristen and offered to help her get back to her dorm, saying he was leaving the party. Paul, Kristen, and Cheryl returned to campus, and since Davis lived off campus, he could not accompany them. Once the three of them were alone, Cheryl began to notice Paul's strange behavior. She noticed the many unexpected stops along the way and the way he interacted with Kristen. While walking, Paul would frequently hold Kristen around the waist, and Kristen would also wrap her arms around his neck. This made Cheryl even more curious, especially when Paul suggested that Cheryl walk ahead while he and Kristen tried to catch up. Cheryl eventually went her own way, but not before reminding Paul to make sure Kristen returned safely. Paul claimed that he had dropped Kristen off at the intersection of the hallways leading to both of their dorms. It was around 2:30 a.m. on May 25, 1996. Kristen Smart was never seen again. When Sunday passed without a call from Kristen, Kristen's roommates and neighbors thought something was wrong. They contacted the university police department to report Kristen missing, but no report was filed. Concerned, they called Kristen's family and the San Luis Obispo Police Department. 5 days after Kristen went missing, Paul was interviewed by UPD investigators. Paul said that the two had gone their separate ways at the intersection. However, investigators quickly noticed Paul's black eye. When asked about it, Paul explained that he had injured it during a basketball game. But a friend later disputed this story, stating that Paul's black eye had appeared before the basketball game. Paul told the friend that he didn't know how he got the black eye, he just woke up with it. A month later, Paul was interviewed again and confessed that he had lied about the black eye incident. This time, Paul said that he had hit his eye on the steering wheel of a truck. However, when questioned further, Paul admitted that this story didn't make sense either. He said he was in the truck at about 2 a.m. on May 27, 1996, and was installing a car radio because he was selling the truck. A search for Kristen began. Search dogs were used on June 29, 1996. For dogs trained to search for human remains were used individually to search for clues at the dormitory. Santa Lucia Hall. Each dog was sent to room 128, Paul Flores' room. The dogs showed no interest in the room, except for the corner of a mattress. Dog handler Carta Adela Morris said the dogs can detect the slightest physiological changes. During the search, their reactions suggested a high probability that there was a body in room 128. Another handler also recalled her dog's behavior while searching room 128. The dog searched the left side of the room several times, and Tori's behavior and strong reactions suggested that she had picked up the scent of something, but was still searching for its source. Although Paul Flores remained the prime suspect, no formal charges were ever filed. During that time, Paul Flores continued to live his life freely, although he was suspected by the police. From 1996 to 2007, the investigation continued, and searches were conducted at every possible location, including 4 properties owned by the Flores family. However, none of these searches yielded positive results. On the advice of his attorney, Paul Flores decided not to answer any questions by exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A person who invokes this provision has the right to remain silent and is not required to provide information that could incriminate them. During his 1997 deposition, Paul exercised this right and remained silent. This made it difficult for investigators, especially attorney James R. Murphy, as they were unable to find any new leads. Despite the overwhelming evidence linking Paul to the case, former Sheriff Ed Williams also admitted that he did not see a way to close the case. Paul's silence frustrated the authorities. The Smart family filed a wrongful death lawsuit for Kristen. However, the court decided not to proceed with charges. Kristen's case remains under criminal investigation. Paul and his family have refused to publicly address Kristen's case or the allegations against them. A roommate of Paul's, Derek C., said Paul joked about Kristen's disappearance. However, these allegations remain speculative as Paul has hired a lawyer to defend himself from further questioning. 6 years after her disappearance, Denise Smart said it was a difficult time. A longtime case follower, Chris Lambert, who was 8 at the time, was haunted by Kristen's disappearance. As he grew older, he wondered why the case of Kristen were still no answers. In 2018, Chris quit his job to create a podcast about the case full-time. With no formal training in law or journalism, he was driven only by his passion for finding answers. In 2019, Chris visited Kristen's memorial on her birthday and decided to wait to meet someone willing to talk about Kristen. Chris met Kristen's mother and began talking to her about her daughter. From there, Chris and the Smart family built a strong relationship and worked to bring Kristen's story to the public through the podcast, In Your Own Backyard. The podcast began as a local series but quickly went national and garnered over 11 million downloads. The core of the podcast follows the case of Kristen Smart and her disappearance from campus. Chris has a unique ability to get people to feel comfortable sharing information with him. He has interviewed many people who have been involved in the case to varying degrees. Chris is especially interested in witnesses who are reluctant to speak or have been ignored by investigators. He has uncovered many allegations that have been speculation for years. An interview with an Australian exchange student brought to light a possible fight between Kristen and Paul. According to Chris, the student allegedly saw Kristen fighting with Paul on the night of her disappearance. During the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance, several theories emerged. The first theory was that Paul Flores was injured in a fight with Kristen. The second theory was that Paul's father, Ruben Flores, helped cover up the crime. The third theory was that Kristen's body was buried in the Flores backyard. The investigation also revealed allegations of serious misconduct by Paul toward multiple women. Women who had attended school or worked with Paul reported his excessive flirting and excessive drinking. Several women accused Paul of sexual or physical assault, including harassment and controlling behavior. Chris attempted to contact Paul for an interview, but was unsuccessful. An interview could have cleared up some of the loose ends and given Paul a chance to address the allegations against him. However, Chris has not contacted Kristen's family. San Luis Obispo Police Chief and Parkinson praised Chris for his work in helping to advance the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance. Chris created a compelling, well-done podcast that drew people to the case. Parkinson noted that going public with the story convinced several people involved to come forward, which had a significant impact on the investigation. Denise Smart also thanked Chris for his hard work, saying that the podcast had created an opportunity for people to come together to seek the truth. She also thanked Sheriff Parkinson for helping to keep the case fresh since he took office in 2011. Although the Flores family has remained silent, the investigation and podcast have shaken their confidence. On January 29, 2020, 2 trucks owned by Paul Flores were presented as evidence. Then, on February 5 of that year, authorities executed search warrants at 4 different locations, including a home in Los Angeles. During the search, Paul Flores was briefly detained. On April 22, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was executed at Paul Flores' home in San Pedro, California. The search resulted in the recovery of several items of evidence, including date rape drugs and videos showing Paul Flores sexually assaulting young women. Paul Flores was subsequently arrested on February 11, 2021, in Palos Verdes, Rancho, California, on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. In March of that year, a search warrant was issued at the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, and police used dogs and ground-penetrating radar to search the property, and an older Volkswagen was towed away for evidence after the dogs conducted the search. On April 13, Paul and his father, Ruben, were arrested by the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in connection with Kristen's case. Paul and Ruben were charged in the case involving Kristen. Paul was charged with murder, and Ruben was charged with accessory after the fact. Due to the statute of limitations, Paul was able to escape the sexual assault charge but still faced a first-degree murder charge for allegedly killing during attempted rape. In September 2021, a judge declared the case sufficient to go to trial in April 2022. However, the trial was postponed and moved to Monterey County. On July 18, 2022, Paul and Ruben's trials began simultaneously but with two separate jury groups. In his opening statement, Deputy Prosecutor Chris Pavril described Kristen as a young person who had been cruelly treated and taken too soon. He said Kristen's family was suffering from the unknown whereabouts of their daughter and blamed Paul Flores for this. The deputy prosecutor also presented evidence found at Ruben's home that showed both Paul and Ruben were responsible for Kristen's death and the disposal of her body. However, Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, questioned the veracity of this evidence. He said it was a tragic situation that Kristen's body was never found and there was no DNA evidence. He stated that people believed she was dead, but there was no concrete evidence of what happened to her after Paul left her at the Doran. Since July, Paul Flores' trial has attracted public attention as multiple allegations of harassment and violence have been made. Several women have come forward to accuse Paul Flores of inappropriate behavior, including two women who call themselves Rondado and Saradu. Both women alleged that they met Paul Flores and then felt unusually lethargic, leading to memory loss. When they woke up, they said Paul Flores had abused them. Their detailed and emotional testimony brought jurors to tears, forcing Judge Jennifer O'Keefe to call a recess. In addition, testimony regarding the search of Ruben Flores' home also moved another juror to tears. Investigators and experts also attended the trial, providing more details about the case. Judge O'Keefe said the trial would be long and difficult, and jurors would likely be emotional at times. One of the key pieces of evidence presented at the trial was Jennifer Hudson's testimony. She said she met Paul Flores when she was 17, and that he told her that he had buried Kristen Smart under the slope in his backyard in Hawasna. This was one of the most important pieces of evidence presented at the trial. Paul's defense attorney questioned Jennifer's testimony and highlighted her recreational use of drugs and alcohol, calling into question her credibility. The attorney suggested that she was being dishonest in her answers to the question. In fact, Jennifer admitted in a social media post that she did not report the incident to police until after a podcast aired. She also canceled an interview with a detective after meeting with the podcast producer in 2019. The attorney went on to ask Jennifer if she thought Kristen Smart was buried in Susan Flores' backyard. She suggested that this was the most plausible explanation. When the attorney pursued the subject of Jennifer's association with biker gang members, the prosecutor objected to the question and the judge sided with them. During cross-examination, Pavril asked Jennifer to explain her previous testimony and that Jennifer felt responsible for the Smart family's suffering. She explained that if she had not been afraid, she would have spoken up sooner. Jennifer then broke down in tears. No reason was given, and the trial was adjourned after Jennifer's testimony. The trial of Kristen Smart is scheduled to continue until October 2022. For the Smart family, the emotional, decades-long search for the truth is finally coming to an end. However, the grief over the loss of their daughter will never end. On October 18, 2022, separate juries hearing the case simultaneously in Monterey County Circuit Court found Paul Flores guilty of first-degree murder and his father, Ruben Flores, not guilty of being an accessory after the fact. Ruben Flores faces a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison on March 10, 2023. Paul Flores is currently serving his sentence at Pleasant Valley State Prison. On August 23, 2023, Flores was attacked by fellow inmate Jason Boudreau, who was serving a life sentence for killing his girlfriend. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan was born in 1980 in Toronto into a large and close-knit family. There were 5 children in the family, and Brett was the second. He had 2 older brothers, Christopher and Leland, and a younger brother, AJ. Brett's parents always tried to instill the right values in their children by promoting a healthy lifestyle. Brett's father worked at a newspaper and was also a fitness trainer. His mother dedicated herself to homemaking and loved growing flowers. Brett's mother could be strict and harsh in raising her 4 sons, while his father was gentle and reserved. Each son in the family pursued his own path. After graduating from high school, Brett enrolled at the University of Toronto. However, he quickly struggled with his studies. After 2 painful breakups, Brett could not concentrate on his studies and eventually decided to drop out of university. Brett felt jealous as he watched his friends and classmates build relationships, get married, and achieve success in life. Meanwhile, he felt like he was not accomplishing anything significant, which made him feel like a failure. After getting a job as a painter, he realized that this career was not suitable for him. At the same time, Brett was concerned about his appearance, spending a lot of money on personal needs and on girls. As a result, he accumulated a large debt of up to 60,000 Canadian dollars, which he had no way to repay. When creditors started demanding money, Brett fell into a deep depression. He felt like a complete failure but did not dare to confess his problems to anyone. In desperation, Brett was determined to find a way out of his difficult situation and make a large sum of money quickly. He decided to rob a bank. On October 20, 2007, he put his plan into action. He chose a bank near his home and created a disguise by covering his face with bandages, pretending to have an injured left arm, limping, and carrying a stack of papers. Brett robbed his first bank by pretending to be sick. He entered and approached the cash register. There, he handed over a note demanding cash and warned the clerk that he was hiding a weapon. Out of fear, the clerk quickly gave Brett the money in the cash register. The amount was only about $1,000, which Brett was not happy about, but he decided not to attract any more attention. So he took the money and left the scene. Brett was caught on security cameras during the robbery. Despite this, he was not caught initially because he avoided using the same technique and changed his disguise each time. Instead of using fake bandages to look like a sick person, he wore a fake beard and hat to hide his identity. His next bank robberies achieved different results. Throughout his 12 bank robberies, Brett accumulated more than $28,000 in cash. He was always evasive, trying to avoid the police. Finally, on June 20, 2008, the police identified Brett, and he was arrested during his 13th attempted robbery. This surprised everyone because Brett had previously volunteered at a children's hospital and was now a robber. Brett was sentenced to 5 years in prison. During his sentence, experts conducted psychological evaluations and concluded that he showed no signs of aggression or violence. Additionally, Brett did not use illegal substances and did not suffer from mental disorders during his sentence. After 2 years, Brett was paroled for good behavior. The prison staff were impressed with him because he was a pleasant, charismatic, and hardworking young man. They felt that he had only made one serious mistake due to the pressure of debt and deserved the second chance. Brett's record showed that he was a model prisoner with a low risk of reoffending. Upon his release, Brett was required to attend a course of psychotherapy and report any problems he encountered in his family relationships or at work. This helped him avoid reoffending. However, the reality turned out to be much more complicated than Brett had anticipated. The debts were still outstanding, and he could not pay them off. Finding a job was also difficult because no one wanted to hire an ex-convict, even though he had skills in painting. In desperation, Brett declared bankruptcy. Fortunately, his parents supported him financially, allowing him to continue his studies at university, this time in information technology. Brett also continued to see a psychologist under court order and tried to stabilize his life. During therapy, Brett was advised to be more open and honest with the people around him. In September 2011, a friend of Brett's arranged a blind date with a girl named Kristen Baxter. Kristen was a physical therapist, lived alone in an apartment, and had a small dog. She also loved to travel. When Brett met Kristen, they immediately had a special connection. They quickly found they were compatible and attracted to each other. They both loved animals and traveling, which created a bond between them. Not long after, Brett and Kristen began a romantic relationship. Brett and Kristen spent a lot of time together, attending sporting events and hiking. They also went on a vacation together in the Bahamas with Kristen's family. Kristen's dog immediately took a liking to Brett, which made a good impression. Brett's life seemed to be back on track, and he no longer exhibited suspicious behavior. He longed for a quiet and cozy life with his beloved girlfriend. When Brett moved into Kristen's apartment in January 2013, their relationship entered a new phase. They began thinking about getting married. However, Brett was hiding a truth from Kristen. In reality, he was not the person she thought he was. While Brett's brothers were building their careers and becoming independent, he was just studying and living off his parents' money. He hid his real life and focused only on enjoying the vibrant city life with Kristen. They enjoyed going to cozy restaurants and swimming in the pool at night, but Brett never revealed the truth about his circumstances. Brett and Kristen often traveled to warm countries. However, their lives were turned upside down when Brett's father suddenly passed away. Brett moved in with his mother to help with the funeral arrangements and support her during this difficult time. During this period, Brett confessed to his mother, Susan, that he loved Kristen very much and dreamed of marrying her. However, he did not have enough money to buy a decent engagement ring, so he hesitated to propose. Brett's mother was touched by her son's words and gave him money to buy an expensive ring. With a luxurious diamond ring, Brett proposed to Kristen, and she accepted. The couple began to prepare for their wedding. However, Brett still had many worries about the future. He didn't know how he would support his family. He also had legal issues, bankruptcy, and debt that he hadn't disclosed to Kristen. To address these issues, Brett decided to focus on finding a decent, stable job. In early 2016, Brett finally found a good job in the IT field. He was very happy to share this news with Kristen, and they decided to celebrate with their families. However, everything changed when his new employer learned about his criminal past and fired him immediately. This took a serious toll on Brett's self-esteem. To avoid upsetting Kristen, Brett decided not to tell her about this failure. Instead, he lied and said that he would work remotely from home. Every day, when Kristen went to work, Brett would pretend to work on the computer. Kristen was very happy, thinking that Brett would start earning a lot of money and they would be able to stand on their own. Kristen started preparing for the wedding scheduled for September 16, 2016. She chose the most beautiful and expensive options they could afford. A luxurious banquet hall was booked for the ceremony, and the bachelor party before the wedding was to be held at a luxurious ski resort. The couple even started looking for a spacious and cozy house to settle down in after the wedding, as they were tired of living in a small apartment. Susan was extremely happy, thinking that her son was independent, had graduated from college, and had a high-paying job. She looked forward to the day when her son would get married and move into his own house. But the reality was completely the opposite. Brett had lied about all of this. He was trapped in his own fabricated thoughts and could not get out. In an effort to earn money, Brett took on any side job he could and even helped his mother with housework to earn money. He went to see his mother every day, looking for things to do and fixing things to get paid. Susan became suspicious when she saw her son hanging around the house all day, constantly doing this and that instead of going to work. If Brett made as much money as he claimed, why did he need these odd jobs? Susan began to ask her son difficult questions, which Brett initially tried to avoid. But then he remembered his therapist's advice about the importance of honesty, and finally dared to confess his troubles to his mother. He begged his mother for significant financial support, promising to continue looking for work. However, his mother was extremely disappointed and angry when she learned the truth. She refused to give him any money and threatened to tell Kristen everything. Brett was extremely angry at his mother's harsh words, and he feared that Kristen would leave him if she found out the truth. Brett was desperate because he didn't want to lose his girlfriend and have to move back in with his mother. He feared that if that happened, he would feel like a loser for the rest of his life. So he decided to carry out a strange plan. Unable to legally purchase a gun due to his criminal record, Brett chose to purchase a crossbow to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. He purchased the old crossbow with cash. The next day, Brett returned to his mother's house under the pretext of helping with home repairs to earn money. However, he had other intentions. On August 25, 2016, his mother, Kristen, woke up early as usual and went to work. Meanwhile, Brett stayed home and pretended to work. In reality, he was preparing for another act. To avoid suspicion, Brett created a keystroke automaton on his computer to give the impression that he was working. He also set up an automatic email function to send at a specific time to create an alibi. Next, Brett gathered all the necessary items for his disguise into a gym bag, including clothes and a wig. To avoid being caught on surveillance cameras, he sneaked out of the house through the fire escape and went to Susan's house incognito, wearing clothes and a wig so that no one would recognize him. However, when he reached the door, he took off all his disguises and went inside. Once inside, Brett tried to convince his mother to give him money. But Susan continued to refuse. A fierce argument broke out between them, with Susan demanding that Brett confess his lie to Kristen. Otherwise, she would expose him herself. As the argument became more heated, Susan sensed something was wrong. She took advantage of the moment when Brett stepped outside and called her eldest son, Chris. She begged Chris to come and help resolve the conflict with Brett. Brett returned to the garage for an important reason: he had hidden a crossbow there earlier. Once he found the weapon, he began to prepare everything for the shot. However, this required more time and effort than he had imagined. At that moment, his mother entered the garage in a rage. Brett quickly found a nearby tool and struck her twice, hitting her in the cheek and ear. She screamed in pain and shock at the sight of her own son attacking her. A fight broke out between them. During the scuffle, both fell to the floor and rolled around, knocking over everything in their path. In the chaos, Brett found a long, dirty rag, and without thinking much, he used it to strangle her. Only after carrying out this act did Brett realize that things had gone terribly wrong. His original murder plan had turned into a nightmare. He remembered that his brother Chris, who had been called by their mother, was about to arrive at the garage. Brett decided to remove his brother from the list of potential witnesses. He jumped up, grabbed the crossbow, and started preparing. A plan to kill Chris formed in Brett's mind. After preparing everything for the new crime, Brett hid in the garage, waiting for Chris. Soon, Chris entered the garage to find their mother, not knowing that he was in danger. Brett quietly approached Chris from behind and shot him in the back of the head. Chris fell immediately. Brett dragged his body close to their mother's and covered it with a tarp. Brett quickly changed his clothes and prepared to run away. However, he did not expect that his younger brother, AJ, was visiting and appeared at the door. For Brett, this was a disastrous situation. Brett began to consider his next move: run away after changing his clothes or stay and kill AJ. He feared that when his brother discovered the bodies, AJ would immediately call the police and he would be arrested. This fear drove Brett to commit another murder. After finding AJ, Brett followed him. Brett approached AJ with the intention of shooting him in the back of the head, just as he had done to Chris. However, this time things did not go as planned. AJ sensed danger and noticed that Brett was carrying a weapon. A scuffle broke out between the two brothers. During the fight, Brett attempted to injure AJ by shooting him in the neck with the crossbow. AJ screamed in pain and fled. He ran out of the house, leaving a trail of blood in the sand, and eventually collapsed from exhaustion in the driveway. It was then that Brett learned that there was another brother sleeping in the house, Leland, 39. He was awakened by AJ's terrified screams. Leland looked out the window and saw his brother covered in blood on the road. Panicked, he rushed to the phone to call 911 but couldn't make it. At that moment, Brett rushed at him in a frenzy. Leland and Brett started a fierce fight, spreading throughout the house and turning it into a bloody mess. Taking advantage of Brett's distraction, Leland sneaked out without being detected. He crawled to the neighbor's house and passed out right in front of it. The kind neighbors immediately called the police. Meanwhile, Brett angrily ran back to the yard and saw AJ, injured, trying to crawl away. Obsessed with the desire to kill his brother, Brett chased after AJ before the neighbors discovered him. However, while chasing AJ, Brett was surprised to find that Leland had told the neighbors everything. From that moment on, Brett had no chance to save himself. The police were about to arrive at the crime scene and put an end to his bloody journey. Brett's murder plan had failed. In desperation, Brett decided to surrender and returned to the house. There, he sat on the porch, holding a bottle of water, and waited for the police to arrive. When the police and ambulance arrived, paramedics confirmed that their mother and Chris had passed away. AJ still had signs of life, but his condition was critical. However, on the way to the hospital, AJ passed away due to his injuries. Leland, despite his serious injuries, survived. He was taken to the hospital for treatment and medical attention and gradually began to recover. Meanwhile, Brett was arrested at the scene of the crime and faced serious charges of first-degree murder and attempted murder of his brother. The news left Kristen reeling, especially since their wedding was only 3 weeks away. Kristen was devastated when she learned the truth about her lover. Brett's criminal past, including a robbery conviction, financial hardship, unemployment, and the horrific murder of his family, left her in disbelief. She wondered how she could have lived with this man all this time without knowing the truth. Kristen immediately called off the wedding and returned to her apartment. There, she discovered a strange device that Brett had made to create an alibi. Mistaking it for an explosive device, she panicked and called the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene, evacuated the residents of the building, and began to carefully examine the mysterious device. After a short time, they discovered that the device was just a clever invention of Brett's. Although initially concerned about the danger, the police later realized that the device was harmless. However, they were impressed by Brett's extraordinary ingenuity and care. His intelligence and inner strength were undeniable, but unfortunately, he used them for the wrong purpose. At trial, Brett pleaded guilty and made a deal with the prosecution. He admitted that his actions constituted second-degree murder and hoped for a lighter sentence. Brett explained that he only intended to use the crossbow to scare his mother and have a serious talk with her. He wanted his mother to finally understand and support him, but things got out of hand. Brett claimed that he had no intention of hurting his brothers, they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The prosecution believed that the defendant had planned to harm his mother from the beginning, not just stop at a conversation. They argued that Brett had brought the crossbow with the intention of killing Susan and should be held strictly responsible. As a result, he was convicted of first-degree murder of his mother and second-degree murder of his brother. The court handed down harsh sentences, 3 life terms with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In addition, Brett was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the attempted murder of his brother Leland. All sentences were to run concurrently, meaning he could only apply for early release after a quarter of a century. Brett's only surviving brother, Leland, received the sentence with relief. Despite the pain and bitterness of the loss, Leland truly respected Brett's remorse. In Leland's mind, his brother was not a bad person at heart but had lost his way in life. Brett had taken the path of deceit and was eventually mired in the quagmire of his own lies. He could no longer get out, which led to a terrible tragedy. Brett Ryan's terrifying story serves as a warning to us all. It demonstrates that small lies and the concealment of truth can lead to dire consequences. When we continue to lie, the lies grow and accumulate, becoming unmanageable. As a result, not only is the liar's life ruined, but so are the lives of their loved ones. Brett Ryan had the opportunity to change after his first prison sentence. He had the support of his girlfriend and a loving family, and he could have gone to school and found a job. However, he chose to lie, leading to a disastrous outcome and ruining more than one life. Whether Brett truly admitted his mistake or just wanted a lighter sentence is not as important as the lessons he learns while serving his life sentence. Can he look back on his life, reflect on his mistakes, and strive to become a better version of himself? Only Brett knows the answer. However, his story certainly makes us reflect on our own actions. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Kenneth Keith. Michael Hawkinsmith, 35, was born in Danville, Kentucky. He was a well-known pastor at a local church where he lived. After working at the church for a long time, he decided to work at a local pawn shop called ABC while continuing to work as a part-time pastor. After a while, due to the previous owner's health issues, Michael had to take over the entire pawn shop. Being an honest and helpful person, he easily connected with people. In his personal life, Michael was married to Angela, and the two had 2 children together, Andrew and Naomi. Michael and Angela jointly owned the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop in Danville, Kentucky. They homeschooled their 9-year-old son Andrew and took care of their newborn daughter Naomi. Andrew often visited his parents' workplace and considered it his playground. However, on the morning of September 20, 2013, the Hawkinsmiths went to the ABC store. The morning went as planned. Dan Smith, a regular at the pawn shop, made a scheduled visit. Smith, known as the Gold Man, was known for buying and selling gold between pawn shops across the state. About 15 minutes after opening, as Michael and Smith were making their transactions, a bearded man entered the store and ordered everyone to get on the ground, followed by horrific events. Andrew, who was at the ABC store at the time, after being instructed by his mother, Angela, to hide, noticed the tense situation and quickly called the police to report the situation. 6 minutes after the alarm call, the police arrived at the scene of the murder. When they entered the building, they found a large trail of blood that led them to Michael Hawkinsmith. They then found his wife, Angela, 38, and another victim, Dan Smith, 60, a broker, on the other side of the counter. All 3 victims had suffered serious injuries from gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Police later found Andrew, 9, and Naomi, 14 months, hiding in a closet. Andrew and Naomi had been through unimaginable horror and were orphaned, having lost both their parents. When examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase belonging to Dan Smith. Remarkably, the victim's personal belongings and all the cash in the cash register were untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive. The case was complicated by the lack of surveillance cameras at the pawn shop. Therefore, police had to search for potential witnesses. An employee of Rainbow Cleaners, a nearby dry cleaner, provided vital information when he described a vehicle that had been parked near the building that morning. The vehicle was a silver pickup truck driven by a large man with a bushy beard. While one team of investigators searched the area, another team had to notify the victims' closest relatives of the tragedy. Michael's parents were devastated by the news. However, they also felt blessed to know that their grandchildren, Andrew and Naomi, had survived. The tragic news reached the daughter of the third victim, Dan Smith. Dan Smith was involved in the purchase of precious metals and was well versed in the specifics of his job, which made it easy for him to find common ground with different people. His business involved handling large amounts of cash, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led police to suspect that Dan Smith may have been the criminal's primary target. Through surveillance, police discovered that before going to the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop, Dan Smith had gone to the Lawson Jewelry Store in Harrodsburg, 10 miles northeast of Danville. Inside the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera mounted on the far wall that was monitoring every customer who entered and exited the store. Their goal was to determine if anyone was following Dan Smith. At 8:16 a.m., Dan Smith entered the store, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. Dan Smith was carrying a briefcase identical to the one later found at the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, he walked toward the back of the store. Moments later, Dan Smith reappeared in the footage, exiting the back of the store, chatting briefly with an elderly woman who had just entered, and then leaving immediately. Footage from the exterior camera did not show anything suspicious. The police could do nothing but monitor the man, unaware that he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, Andrew Hawkinsmith was brought to the police station to testify. Andrew told the story of how he was at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith came in with a bag full of money. While Michael and Dan were talking, a stranger walked in and demanded the bag of money immediately. According to Andrew, Dan Smith immediately gave the stranger his bag of money. Andrew said that his father asked the man to stop, but the man also shot his father with a handgun similar to the one Andrew often played with. After that, his mother instructed him to take his younger sister, Naomi, to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew picked up his sister and hid. At that moment, the criminal pointed the gun at Angela. The 9-year-old boy thought the reason the stranger did this might be because of the money. The boy described the stranger as a very tall man with a fake-looking blonde beard, which matched the description given by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. In investigating the case, police thoroughly investigated the business run by the Hawkinsmith family. They discovered that the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop had a different owner, Steve Devine. Although he usually attended Friday transactions with Dan Smith, he was absent on the morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had an allergic reaction that morning and had to cancel all his appointments. His wife confirmed this story. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver pickup truck helped eliminate him as a suspect. Steve Devine also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith. The new owner had yet to install a replacement. Kenneth Allen Keith, 48, is a pastor like Michael Hawkinsmith. He sold the pawn shop after being diagnosed with brain cancer. However, he is still the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers, in Pulaski County, near Danville's Bowles District. Their friendship began when Michael worked at a church youth camp and lasted 15 years. The Hawkinsmiths respected Pastor Kenneth, and he was like a beloved uncle to Andrew. With no significant leads, investigators decided to search the street surveillance systems near ABC Gold Games and More and other pawn shops. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate company Danville Rentals. Surveillance footage captured a silver pickup truck at 8:45 a.m., but the image was too blurry to determine the license plate or make. However, eyewitness testimony from Rainbow Cleaners helped police identify the vehicle. The witness described the vehicle as an older model with a distinctive square body shape. The vehicle in the video also clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the vehicle all suggested that police had found the vehicle of the criminal. They continued to search surveillance systems farther and farther away from the pawn shop. Finally, at 8:17 a.m., cameras at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle. Investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge pickup truck. Dan Smith's family was also devastated by the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they attended the funeral and held back their anger. In search of more clues, the Danville police asked the public to come forward with any information about the crime or the vehicle involved. On September 24th, the police received a call from Tracy Hurl, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and said that in their last conversation, they had discussed the Danville murders. At that point, Kenneth seemed to have changed. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed Tracy that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville to pick up medication for his wife. Kenneth also expressed guilt over what had happened, as he had given Michael Hawkinsmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. It turned out Kenneth's relationship with the Hawkinsmith family was not what people thought. Tracy recounted that in a conversation with Kenneth said that Michael was a fraud and that Michael had done everything to take over the business from him. These statements aroused suspicion, leading to Kenneth being named a suspect. To verify Kenneth's alibi, investigators decided to review surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where Kenneth said he had purchased medication for his wife at 9:24 a.m. According to the surveillance footage, a man entered the pharmacy. It was Kenneth. But just a few minutes earlier, the man was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were easily identifiable features of an attacker. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Kenneth was involved in the attack. There was a 6-minute gap between Andrew Hawkinsmith's call to the police and Kenneth's arrival at the pharmacy. The police decided to check whether it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes, so Kenneth could have committed the murder, quickly gotten in the car, and gone to the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. In addition, the main clue was that Kenneth had an unregistered 2008 Dodge pickup truck, silver in color. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial and not enough to make an arrest. So the investigators asked Tracy Hurl to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at Kenneth. Fortunately, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Kenneth finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hawkinsmith family. Everyone had been waiting for this to happen. Kenneth began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. Kenneth said that he was in Danville, but he was at the pharmacy. Kenneth confirmed that he was standing in the pharmacy while all this was happening. Kenneth then explained that he had left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then drove to the car wash to prepare for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 a.m., Kenneth was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cash register with a noticeable smile. Exterior camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Kenneth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25 a.m., matching all previous images captured by various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest Kenneth. However, when he was offered a lie detector test to clarify his role in the case, he reacted in an unusual way. He claimed that he would not be able to pass a lie detector test because, during his military service, he had performed some special missions that involved killing a number of people. Investigators then executed a search warrant at Kenneth Allen Keith's pawn shop and discovered some important evidence. They found a fake beard and a significant amount of cash without any legal explanation as to how he had obtained it. In particular, they also found bundles of money wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, indicating that Dan Smith was a customer. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawn shop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a deceased broker. This raised suspicions about Keith's involvement in the case. In addition, investigators also found several .22 caliber shell casings in Keith's pawn shop. After ballistic analysis, they discovered that these casings had been fired from the same type of weapon used to shoot Andrew and Naomi's parents. Kenneth Allen Keith was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and robbery. He believed that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were conspiring to remove him from the business. However, there was no evidence that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were involved in any conspiracy. When Kenneth met Dan Smith at the pawn shop, he tried to create a fake plan to make the police think that the case was a robbery. However, the plan failed when the police investigated and found no evidence of suspicious activities by Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine. On September 20th, Kenneth arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawn shop until he saw Dan Smith's car parked nearby. Kenneth then killed Dan Smith, Michael Hawkinsmith, and Angela Hawkinsmith. After taking all the cash, Kenneth calmly left the crime scene and stopped at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, which was captured on surveillance cameras, creating a false alibi. Kenneth's decision to have his car washed appears to have been another attempt to remove any evidence that might have been left on the car. Prior to sentencing, in 2017, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Megan Landowski. Megan Landowski lived with her family in Portsmouth, Virginia, a bustling seaport town. Her family included her father, Chris Short, a Navy officer, her mother, Angela, and 2 other siblings. Chris Short had been transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth after a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Chris's family felt relieved when they moved there. Megan Landowski, 16 years old, was the oldest in the family. When her family moved, she quickly signed up for dance classes. Megan had a deep passion for dance and showed outstanding talent from the beginning. She started with ballet and then expanded into many different genres. Megan's mother described her as a beautiful, friendly, and talented girl. Megan adapted quickly to her new learning environment at Woodrow Wilson High School. She had an attractive personality and easily made friends with her classmates. Although she attended a prestigious high school that specialized in dance, Megan wanted to attend a regular high school so she could hang out with friends in her neighborhood. She was described as vivacious and kind, with a natural tendency to connect with people. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early to go to school. She chatted with her mother about the upcoming test before going to class. After saying goodbye to Angela, Megan went to school. Angela had no idea that this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Megan's school day ended early, and she went home. Angela had told Megan that she expected Megan's call when she got home. Upon arriving, Megan left a voicemail detailing how her day went, reassuring Angela that she had returned safely and ending by telling Angela she loved her. Then she continued to prepare lunch for herself. However, things took a terrifying and disturbing turn around 4 p.m. Megan's stepfather, Chris, returned home and found the door open. Although he didn't worry at first, he knew Megan had been warned about leaving the door open, so he trusted that she wouldn't leave it unattended like that. He called her name, but there was only silence. When he entered the kitchen, he was faced with a horrifying sight: Megan lying motionless on the floor. Chris quickly called the police and reported the incident. Local detective Doug Funkhauser suddenly received an alarming call reporting the murder of a young girl in town. Immediately, he rushed to the location of the crime, Roberts Court in Portsmouth. When he approached the scene of the crime, he saw horrifying signs. The bloodstains on the door handle were very clear. When he entered the kitchen, he discovered a gruesome scene. The body of a young girl lay on the floor, her body seriously injured. Megan had suffered multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed with tape. For Detective Doug, this case was one of the most brutal cases he had ever investigated. An initial investigation revealed no signs of forced entry. However, a leaf found inside the home matched a bush outside a first-floor window, suggesting that the killer may have entered through that window. In the upstairs bedroom, signs of a struggle were evident on the bed. Megan's underwear was on the floor, and a box of duct tape was found under the left corner of the bed, appearing to match the tape used to bind Megan's hands and face. Forensic experts found blood on the tape and other items, which were collected for further analysis, including pillows, sheets, and blankets. Additional forensic testing indicated that the bedroom was the scene of the sexual assault, as traces of the killer's semen were found on Megan's comforter and underwear. These findings suggested that Megan had been assaulted in the bedroom before the attack downstairs. Megan was found with a large number of injuries, 43 stab wounds, including 11 post-mortem. The forensic team also reported that Megan was naked from the waist down, with her hands bound behind her back with duct tape. The murder weapon was determined to be a missing kitchen knife. Investigators later found the knife in the sink and determined that the initial attack had occurred in the bedroom, but Megan had somehow escaped down the stairs. Investigators discovered that the perpetrator left footprints during the crime and then washed his hands in the kitchen sink. A second knife used in the crime was discovered in a nearby drain. Detectives quickly searched the neighborhood for witnesses, but no one provided any useful information. The killer appeared to have escaped undetected during the day. After the shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly alerted the police to their suspicions regarding the identity of the killer. They suspected an old acquaintance with a troubled past and believed he may be involved in the case. This person is Robert Hickey, a former colleague of Chris's in the Navy who had sexually assaulted Megan when she was 16. Chris and Robert had worked together as technicians and had become close friends, often inviting Robert and his family to their home. Megan's behavior changed dramatically after the abuse. She became withdrawn, and her grades began to decline. Chris noticed the change and asked her what was wrong, but she was initially reluctant to talk about it. Eventually, Megan confided in Chris, revealing that Robert had been sexually assaulting her in secret. Chris was furious and immediately cut off ties with the Hickeys. He also reported the abuse to the authorities. Around the same time, Megan's parents filed a lawsuit against Robert, just 5 months before she was murdered. The trial is pending, and Megan is expected to testify against him. Robert has a lot at stake, including his reputation and his freedom. Megan expressed concern that Robert might try to harm her to prevent her from testifying, and unfortunately, it appears that her fears have come true. When police searched Robert's home, they did not find any direct evidence linking him to Megan's murder. However, upon closer inspection of his computer, they discovered that he had attempted to erase the hard drive. Investigators were able to recover a recently deleted file containing sexually explicit images of minors. This discovery led to Robert being charged with possession of child pornography and becoming the prime suspect in Megan's murder. He was brought in for questioning, and authorities hope that he will confess to the crime. Robert was visibly nervous throughout the interview, but he insisted that he was at the Navy base on the day of Megan's murder. He denied any involvement and claimed he had not left the base. However, after verifying his alibi with his colleagues, the police discovered a gap in his timeline, raising the possibility that he might have been involved in the murder. The police obtained surveillance footage from the base but found no evidence that Robert had left. Despite this, he remained a suspect. To investigate further, a DNA sample was taken from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results showed no match, ruling out Robert as the killer. This discovery left the police without any leads or suspects, leaving them frustrated. They then turned their attention to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After taking a DNA sample from Chris, he was quickly cleared. Megan's family members, including her younger brother, Corey, were also ruled out as suspects. The autopsy revealed that the murder was extremely brutal, indicating that the perpetrator had used extreme violence against Megan. Given Megan's popularity and gentle nature, it was difficult to narrow the investigation based on hostile relationships. This made the identity of the killer even more mysterious. The investigation into Megan's case did not produce any suspects. Detectives focused on Megan's life at school and interviewed each of her friends. Megan's best friend was interviewed but did not provide any useful information. Police then spoke to other friends and acquaintances from Woodrow Wilson High School and learned that Megan had dated a few people but nothing too serious. Although these men did not appear to be suspects, police asked them to provide DNA samples as a precaution. Meanwhile, experts retested DNA from the crime scene, which suggested that the killer was likely an African American male. For 6 months, no major developments were made, but that changed when a helpful classmate provided valuable information, a list of boys with whom Megan had occasionally flirted. Police looked through the list and found that they had spoken to all of the boys on the list, except for one, a 17-year-old named Robert Lee Barnes. Megan and Robert Barnes were both in the performing arts program at Churchill High School. Megan confided in her friend that she believed Robert might have a crush on her. At school, Robert was considered an excellent violinist, and as a student, he had always earned good grades, exhibited exemplary behavior, and had no disciplinary problems. As one of Megan's friends, Robert visited Megan's home several times, showing respectful behavior during these visits, and Megan's parents were very fond of him. When the police questioned Robert about Megan, he described her as a kind and pleasant person and was shocked that someone would want to harm her. He mentioned that he and Megan had attended shows together and occasionally hung out. However, towards the end of the interview, Robert's demeanor changed when he was asked to provide a DNA sample. Unlike Megan's other classmates, who were cooperative with the request, Robert hesitated and then refused, which aroused the suspicion of the investigators. Robert said that his mother did not allow the DNA test, but the police informed him that his parents' permission was not required because he was almost 18 years old. However, Robert still refused. This refusal made the investigators feel uncomfortable and suspicious that something was wrong with Robert. Therefore, after the interview ended, the investigators suggested that he talk to his mother and try again. The day after the initial investigation, Robert contacted the authorities to request a meeting. When asked if he had obtained his mother's permission, he replied that he had not, but he had given them a piece of his chewing gum as a DNA sample. Robert removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a rubber glove, and gave it to the investigators. Despite this, the investigators remained suspicious of Robert. The DNA lab then contacted the detective to inquire about the sample's source. After confirming that Robert had indeed placed the gum in the glove, the lab questioned whether he had been continuously monitored while providing the gum. This investigation was prompted by the surprising fact that the DNA on the gum matched that of a woman. It turned out that Robert had switched the gum he was chewing with another piece before handing it to the investigators. On October 23, 2008, Robert was called in for questioning again, this time with his mother. When confronted with the DNA findings, Robert was asked about the chewing gum. He made a critical mistake by stating, "This happened on Thursday." Up until that point, none of the individuals interviewed by the police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When the officers pointed this out to Robert, he provided an implausible explanation. According to Robert, on that Thursday, Megan had asked him to visit her home. Upon his arrival, Robert claimed to have found Megan being held at gunpoint by a masked individual. The alleged attacker held the gun to Robert, forcing him to tie Megan up. Robert then fabricated a story that he had been compelled to sexually assault Megan. He further claimed that they all went downstairs, where the attacker stabbed Megan after obtaining a knife. Ultimately, Robert stated that the attacker had forced him to inflict an injury on himself to ensure his blood would be present at the crime scene. Robert fabricated a false story to portray himself as the victim and to explain away any incriminating evidence. However, the police did not believe his account. When presented with evidence of footprints found at the scene, the investigator asked Robert why only his footprints were found and not those of the person he claimed had attacked him. Robert's mother intervened, telling Robert to stop talking and asserting that Robert was a good and innocent person. The police then took a DNA sample from Robert. The DNA analysis showed a match between Robert's DNA and the DNA found at the crime scene. As a result, Robert Barnes was arrested for the murder of Megan Landowski. According to police, Robert likely broke into the house through a window that afternoon, surprising Megan in her bedroom. He then attacked her, and when she tried to escape downstairs, he chased her, stabbing her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she was dead. After the crime, Robert left the scene and continued his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Robert became unhealthily obsessed with Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Robert's romantic advances were rejected, he turned to coercion, which led to a tragic end. In September 2009, Robert accepted a plea deal that allowed him to be tried as a juvenile, despite having just turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault. As a result, Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of the motive behind Robert's actions, whether it was love, lust, bitterness, or the pain of rejection, none of these reasons justify his horrific crimes against the person he claimed to love and care for. Robert chose the path of destruction, taking the life of an innocent person and ruining his own life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doran. Els van Doran was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to Jan de Wilde, a jeweler. Together, they had 2 children, Vincent and Carol. Although he worked in his family's jewelry store, Els van Doran's real passion had been skydiving. She initially took up the sport with her husband in 1994, but she quickly overcame his interest as her passion for skydiving grew. Els van Doran was an experienced skydiver with 2,300 jumps. Every weekend and holiday, she spent time skydiving. In 1998, she began formation jumping, and in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed at the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. However, Els van Doran had to leave the team in 2004 due to a herniated disc. After recovering, Els van Doran decided to skydive more for fun than for competition. She joined the Swartberg Parachute Club, where she met a fellow skydiver and close friend, Els Babs Klotmans, who was 26 years old and a school teacher. To avoid confusion within the club, Els Van Doran suggested the nickname Babs for her young friend. Both women were acquainted with Marcel Summers, a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club. As Els Van Doran, Babs, and Marcel became acquainted, Els Van Doran found herself developing a strong relationship with Marcel, which eventually became a romantic relationship. Even though she was married, Els Van Doran was able to keep her relationship with Marcel a secret because her family was used to her spending weekends at the skydiving club. She often visited Marcel's apartment on weekends without arousing her husband's suspicion. What Els Van Doran didn't know was that she not only shared a name with Babs, they also shared a man, Marcel. Unbeknownst to both Els Van Doran and Babs, Marcel had been secretly hooking up with both of them, devising a plan to manage his time with each of them. Friday was for Babs, while Saturday was for Els Van Doran. This arrangement worked for Marcel for a while, but it didn't last long. On Friday evening, November 10, 2006, something unexpected happened. As planned, Babs went to Marcel's residence for a weekly meeting, but what she didn't know was that Els Van Doran had also decided to surprise Marcel that night. Babs and Marcel had just finished dinner and were returning to their apartment when they met Els Van Doran, who was waiting outside the door. That night, Babs did not sleep in Marcel's bed as expected. Instead, she slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Marcel and her friend, Els Van Doran, were in the bedroom. While in the living room, Babs noticed Els Van Doran's parachute and skydiving equipment nearby. Feeling hurt and betrayed by her friend's actions, Babs acted in a way that would ultimately have devastating consequences. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els Van Doran, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. Their plan was to jump in a four-person formation from 13,000 feet with Tom, another skydiver. During the jump, they would hold hands before leaving and opening their parachutes. Els Van Doran and Tom jumped out of the plane as scheduled, but Babs seemed to have jumped a little late. As they free fell, Babs struggled to keep up with the group. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els Van Doran, and Tom decided to break formation to safely open their parachutes. That's when they realized something serious was going on. Els Van Doran's parachute wouldn't open when she pulled the rope. Remaining calm, Els Van Doran recalled her emergency training and remembered a previous experience where she had successfully deployed her reserve parachute after the main parachute failed. Els Van Doran was plummeting towards the ground at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, with only 20 seconds to perform an emergency maneuver to ensure a safe landing. Despite her best efforts, pulling the reserve parachute cord had no effect and the parachute could not open. In a state of panic, Els Van Doran continued to pull both the main parachute rope and the backup parachute rope. But nothing happened. Marcel, at an altitude of 800 meters, witnessed Els Van Doran's desperate struggle from afar. He was 300 meters above Els Van Doran, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and he knew something was wrong because her parachute had not opened. However, he was powerless to intervene and could only watch in horror. In a last-ditch effort, Els Van Doran tried to untangle her parachute in hopes of activating it, but it was too late. Her life ended. Meanwhile, in Upavbeek town, a woman was drying laundry in her garden when she heard a loud noise. She looked up and saw a person falling from the sky with a parachute, heading straight for her garden. This sight was not unusual as her house was located near a skydiving club and its landing strip. She suddenly noticed a piece of white cloth stuck to her bush. When she got closer, she saw a person lying in the bushes. She immediately called her husband, who was working in the garden, and they quickly called emergency services. Meanwhile, Marcel had landed safely and was desperately searching for Els Van Doran. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the scene where Els Van Doran had landed. As he rushed towards her, he was restrained by the emergency team so they could work. Despite their efforts to resuscitate her, Els van Doran died. Marcel emphasized that Els van Doran's parachute was inoperable, pointing out that it was unusual for both the main and reserve parachutes to fail to open. He then contacted Els van Doran's husband, Jan, to tell him the news. Jan rushed to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the skydiving club to break the tragic news to the other members. The news was heartbreaking. Babs was overcome with grief, falling to her knees and crying in pain. Els van Doran's husband, Jan, went to the skydiving club to pick up her belongings. When he arrived, he met Babs, who offered to help him. However, Jan found it strange that Babs seemed to stand still with a strange grin on her face. She walked towards the dressing room with Jan following, but then suddenly locked the door, leaving Jan outside. After a long wait, Babs finally walked out carrying Els van Doran's belongings. At the scene of the accident, police found Els van Doran's parachute and helmet. The helmet had a camera that recorded her final jump. An autopsy was performed to see if Els van Doran's death was caused by any internal cause. Results showed no signs of alcohol or drugs, leading investigators to conclude that her death was a murder or suicide. This conclusion was based on the severe fractures and internal bleeding caused by the fall. Els van Doran's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her own skydiving club, someone who knew how parachutes worked. As a result, club members were asked not to attend her funeral, but some of Els van Doran's close friends chose to ignore this request. The family's suffering became even greater when police revealed that Els van Doran had a secret affair with Marcel Summers that lasted more than 5 years. Jan was especially hurt when he learned that some of his club members knew about the affair, people he considered friends, but they all had kept quiet. What was even more painful was that Els van Doran had told her clubmates that she had divorced her husband, which was not true. Els van Doran had passed away just 1 day before her child Carol's 15th birthday. At the funeral, Carol gave a heartfelt speech, recalling how her family had prevented her mother from skydiving. They had longed for her to be with them, but Carol also admitted that her mother had been a unique person who wouldn't have been happy if she had given up what she loved. After the funeral, police began investigating the incident with Els van Doran's reserve parachute. They sent a skydiving expert to check the parachute and look for abnormalities. Experts quickly discovered a critical problem: the pilot chute, a small auxiliary parachute that helped deploy the main or reserve parachute, was missing. Obviously, someone had deliberately removed it. Experts also discovered that the main parachute activation cord and one of the cords connecting to the emergency parachute had been cut. During the final review of body cam footage of Els van Doran's fatal skydiving accident, an unidentified piece of red fabric was seen in front of her. Investigators were unable to identify the object as part of Els van Doran's equipment. They therefore asked Doplab residents to thoroughly search their garden and surrounding area for the piece of red cloth and warned them to handle it carefully if found, as it could be potential evidence containing the DNA of the person responsible for sabotaging Els van Doran's parachute. Unfortunately, no one was able to find the piece of fabric. A week after Els van Doran's death, a surprising discovery was made when Babs found the pilot chute. According to Babs, she had discovered the parachute hanging from a tree while driving between Oplab and Genk on the way back from Marcel's apartment. Instead of contacting the police directly, she told Marcel about the discovery. Marcel then called the police, who arrived at the location and found Babs visibly shaken and emotional. The police were skeptical of Babs' story, as they found it unusual that she had stumbled upon the pilot chute. Babs insisted it had been just a coincidence, explaining that she had taken a different route home and had been delayed by a slow-moving tractor. She said this delay had caused her to look up and see the parachute hanging about 20 meters above her, which she interpreted as a sign from Els van Doran. The police were suspicious because they knew that only investigators knew that the pilot had been missing. At that time, 3 people were the main suspects in Els van Doren's suspected murder case: her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. Police searched Marcel's residence and eventually identified him as a suspect. They later also cleared Jan as a suspect. They then searched Babs' home and confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and diary. In her diary, she had written down her feelings following the advice of her psychiatrist. Later, Els Klotmans, also known as Babs, was questioned by the police about her relationship with Marcel and what had happened to Els van Doren. During the interrogation, Babs insisted she had had nothing to do with Els van Doren's parachute. She blamed Marcel, claiming that he had often taken care of Els van Doren's equipment when she stayed at his place on the weekends, or blamed Jan, claiming that Els van Doren had often left her belongings at his house during the week. After the initial interrogation, Babs was released and went home. However, she did not appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20, 2006. It was later discovered that that morning she had tried to take her own life by drinking a combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother had found her unresponsive and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before attempting suicide, Babs had written letters to loved ones expressing her struggle to cope with the loss of her close friend and the extreme stress of being a suspect in a murder case. After recovering, Babs had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 15 days for close observation. This had not been her first attempt at self-harm, as she had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Marcel ended their relationship, believing her actions had been more a call for attention than an actual attempt to commit suicide. He thought she had taken the pill just before her mother had been due to return home, suggesting her main goal had been to divert attention from suspicion of involvement in the murder of Els van Doren. Marcel thought the police had been trying to track down Babs and arrest her based on her lies. While still under psychiatric care, Babs had been arrested on January 11, 2007, as a suspect in the murder of Els van Doren. When Babs appeared in court on January 19, 2007, authorities decided that she would be detained while the investigation was ongoing. Authorities asked Babs to take a polygraph test, but she refused and it was never taken. A thorough examination of Els van Doren's parachute equipment had showed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cord with scissors. The investigation revealed that the person responsible might have been right-handed. Babs spent 3 months in prison by March 2007, having to endure many interrogations. During questioning, she denied any wrongdoing but admitted sending anonymous letters to Els van Doren. The letter affirmed that Els van Doren's actions towards her family were wrong. Jan found the letter, but he interpreted it as a criticism of Els van Doren's frequent absences due to parachuting. However, Babs' intention had been to warn Els van Doren to end her relationship with Marcel. Babs also confessed to calling Marcel anonymously, especially when he had been with Els van Doren. She had intended to threaten them. Investigators analyzed Babs' automatic activation device, AAD, and discovered that Babs had jumped with the rest of the team and deployed her parachute beforehand. This supposedly allowed Babs to witness events unfold from above and monitor where Els van Doren's parachute would land. Babs could have landed and retrieved the parachute later. Babs' trial in the murder of Els van Doren began on September 24, 2010. Babs had been quickly arrested. The prosecution felt confident that they had enough evidence to prove Babs had committed murder. They believed Babs had been motivated by jealousy because she had discovered her lover, Marcel Summers, had been having an affair with her best friend, Els van Doren. Babs had previously told investigators that she knew Marcel preferred Els van Doren to her. The prosecution argued that Babs had wanted to eliminate Els van Doren as a rival. However, Babs' defense argued that the prosecution's case had been based on circumstantial evidence and unproven allegations. During the trial, Babs claimed that she had not seen a future with Marcel and only had an intimate relationship with him because of her low self-esteem. She even suggested that Els van Doran's daughter, Carol, might have wanted to harm her mother for being away for the weekend. However, despite her efforts to manipulate the jury and shift blame, the judge's verdict prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Babs had been convicted of murdering her friend Els van Doran and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfastly maintaining her innocence, had been closely monitored to prevent her from harming herself again. She later filed an appeal claiming that the police had interrogated her without a lawyer. In May 2011, her appeal was dismissed. In June 2022, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Babs was conditionally released after a third appeal and is now free. It is a pity that Els van Doran had suffered a tragic fate and that her family had suffered immense pain when the truth had been revealed. Our sincerest condolences go out to the family and loved ones of Els van Doran, who will be deeply missed.